Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Suter, and I'm the founder of the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. At ATARC, we really focus on all these technology areas, cybersecurity, DevSecOps, but we always look toward the end of the year to kind of really focus on IT modernization and pull it all together. I always use this analogy. It's a totally 1980s analogy, but wax on, wax off, and then we kind of pull it all together. If you haven't noticed, this year's version of the IT Modernization Summit is not in person, it's virtual. So I think that this year it's an understatement to say that COVID has really impacted positively and negatively IT modernization. And so we're really excited to kind of go over what we've learned and since, after COVID. I think we call it anything that happened before COVID kind of gets mixed in and I forget about it because so many different things have happened. So we're going to have a great day today. I want to thank our partners at Software AG, Government Solutions, DocuSign, Pluralsight, Confluent, Acquia Federal Sector, and Blue Prism Software for helping make this programming possible. I'd like to thank all of our government speakers and moderators, and really looking forward to a full day. Hopefully we can get a lot of Q&A and maybe a poll or two. But once again, thank you for taking your time out of the day on a Thursday afternoon. My first, we're going to kick things off with Maria Rowe. Maria is the Deputy Administrator and Deputy Federal Chief Information Officer over at OMB. She is actually in the office this afternoon. I saw her a little bit earlier. Maria, if you'd like to come on. And Maria, I got to know Maria. Hi, Maria.
Hi, Tom.
Yes, and I heard it was Ugly Sweater Day over.
It was. We did. We had a virtual ugly sweater contest today.
Let's see.
Yeah. We did it virtually with the entire team. So there you go. Got an ugly sweater going on. Got the ugly, the cat with the glasses and some gaudy stuff going on.
Well, the cat actually makes the ugly sweater, I think. And for those of you who don't know, I met Maria back when she was running. Maria, historically in the government, has always been like, there's this incredibly impossible project. Let's put her in charge. So when I met Maria, she was working for Dave McClure over at OSIT at the time, now TTS, and she was one of the folks that really got the FedRAMP program going. She's gone to a couple other government places, but we also work together on the Technology Modernization Fund, or helped her, promote that for her. And then she went to SBA, her last stop before this, and it was basically the pinnacle of IT modernization when Paycheck Protection, Paycheck Protection Program came out, and a lot of the things that she worked on that with her all-star team over there actually paid off, and it's been very exciting. But thank you for joining us today, Maria, and I look forward to your talk.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Thank you for inviting me for today. This is really exciting to be here. And you have a great lineup, many of my CIO colleagues, so a shout out to all of you. I checked out the panel and everybody that was on there, so that's terrific. Throughout the pandemic, technology leaders, CIOs and technology leadership were really expected to deliver, right? Look across the federal government, transition to telework and didn't miss a beat. And it wasn't just transitioning to telework, responding to the pandemic and all those increased mission requirements. And IT personnel were asked to respond and really deliver those high quality solutions to really hard problems for the American public. Think about that. And I think it's really important to point out, and I think this is really critical, that the investments that were made over the last several years in modern infrastructure, zero trust networks, investing in the flexibility and the scalability of cloud-based solutions really gave us the ability to scale when the pandemic hit and when we needed it so that we could respond to the mission. I have firsthand experience at SBA with this, and I've seen this throughout the federal government. If we had not taken some big moves to the cloud over the last few years, we would have not accomplished what we did. And I know Nagesh Rao's on the next panel, so I'm going to leave it to him to talk about all the good stuff that we did and how we responded. But it was agency over agency. And again, I don't want to lose sight of that the investments over the last several years really, really helped us moving through this pandemic. And all the investments in cybersecurity as well paid dividends against the threat vectors, the phishing, the scams, and all the malicious emails and the impersonations that were going on and the bogus websites and all of those things. So where does that leave us on federal-wide IT modernization for the long term? And I think this is really where I want to acknowledge, call out the workforce overall. And this has really been a year of change. And the change is offered us the opportunities to innovate, challenge the norms, challenge the status quo. And the workforce, not just the CIOs, the CFOs, and federal leadership, got bureaucracy out of the way, got the red tape out of the way, reduced those barriers so that we could meet the mission and respond to the pandemic. All of those additional requirements from the CARES Act. And we have to maintain the momentum. And I want to acknowledge that workforce because they were so critical. And you know, again, I'll call out SBA and the staff that worked so many hours, overnighters, and projects that we had lined up for, you know, December of this year and into 2021. We moved all that to the left. And you saw that time and time again across the federal government. And again, you saw how fast agencies in the federal government could innovate. We stayed secure and we were responsive, and how we could do that when bureaucracy got out of the way. So today I want to look forward a little bit because our future, it's going to be characterized by greater personalization, automation, digitization, and really more anticipatory services. I think first, the federal government really must continue its digital transformation, right? Keep that momentum I mentioned and have that sustained IT modernization to have a government that's digital, nimble, resilient, secure. And my colleagues here on the following panels, and they're going to talk about AI and future technologies. And, you know, those drivers of change that include, you know, connected devices, 5G, big data, machine learning, AI, nanotechnology, edge computing, robotics, just to name a few, right? But we also have to look at, as we're looking on our digital transformation, those older and even legacy systems that are holding agencies back from using technologies that are needed to create that modern experience, right? And IT teams, they have to rapidly connect legacy systems to modern technologies while minimizing disruption to those systems and to keep delivering on the mission. And that digital transformation is not a one-off activity. It really requires that sustained long-term investment. And with that digital transformation, right, the federal government has to adopt new techniques, right? Technologies, approaches to keep up with that pace of change and continuously modernize the systems and change our way of working. That digital transformation, being digital first, it requires us to foster that culture that embraces risk, agile adoption, and encourages innovation, not in just technology, but in acquisition and many other areas across the federal government. So it's not just about technology being digital first, but it's that culture that'll embrace risk, really think about agile adoption, and again, encourage that innovation. And that digital delivery is really a necessity for our customers. Think about that. The federal government flipped over to telework, brick and mortar buildings closed. Digital was expected from our customers. And this is not just the American public, but our internal employees. And they expect that delivery to be quick, easy, secure, and accessible. So that customer experience is a huge part of that digital transformation, and it's a business discipline, and it has to be embedded in everything we do with that digital transformation as we interact with our customers, whether it's the 2.1 million federal employees or our external customers, the American public. That online digital environment that we are in and that digital experience has to take advantage of that modern technology. Those robust and scalable cloud-based solutions that we've already moved to, even data management practices, and of course, cybersecurity and automation. I think the second thing I really want to look forward on is that, you know, these large modernization projects, they take time, they take funding, and they take flexibility to really manage well. And this is areas where I think, you know, Congress and others can really help us, because, you know, when we start looking at one-year funding, it creates a lot of risk and uncertainty in the ability to have sustained long-term modernization, and continuing to say, you know, we really need funding flexibilities, not, you know, with the MGT Act, the Technology Modernization Fund, IT Working Capital Funds, and other things, because those large-scale modernization projects take time. And as a former CIO, not knowing what my budget's going to be, and if I'm going to be in a CR, I need to know what that funding is going to be so that I can drive multi-year modernization projects and being able to plan for that. And I think part of that is achieving overall value for those dollars that are spent on technology, and demonstrate the value of, you know, even benchmarking to really show cost effectiveness and increase resource efficiency. And you know, that alternate models of funding and how we can do that is critically important. And that need for multi-year funding, we have to have that to sustain long-term modernization, and trying to figure that out as we go forward. Again, keeping in mind those long-term modernization projects are going to take 2, 3, and 4 years. And continuing that investment. So again, you know, the MGT Act, really with the TMF fund, we've seen a lot of success in that. I think there should be more IT working capital funds, certainly where the agencies have requested those to undertake those multi-year efforts. The CIOs know what they need to do. Their partnerships with the business, understanding the business of their agencies, they know what they need to do. They just need the flexibility to be able to do it. But in addition to those bigger steps, I think there's some smaller things that we can do. You know, the IDEA Act, really digital forms, accessibility, all the things within there. Interagency collaboration and employee productivity is a big deal. And we've got some pilots underway on that regarding, you know, so agencies can collaborate across. We saw the need for collaboration throughout the pandemic, not just horizontally in the federal government, but vertically. And this is not a technology challenge. And we've got some pilots underway. We actually have a couple of things. And we're starting to see how agencies can collaborate using cloud-based tools in the same environments. And I think also other things that we can do as we're looking at, you know, modernization and that large scale modernization projects is really unifying the public's digital experience. USDA did a terrific job with farmers.gov, and they're continuing to build on that to bring that capability together for the experience for the farmers. Automation, you know, can really take energy and time. You know, they can really reduce the time spent on administrative activity. And we're going to see as machine intelligence improves, machine learning, AI, augmented decisions, and really going to allow our workforce to focus on higher value, even more complex tasks. We're already seeing it across the federal government for science, engineering, modeling, simulation, all of those things. And again, this really goes to having a government that's digital, nimble, resilient, and secure, right? Looking at that long-term modernization, those legacy systems. We've learned a lot of valuable lessons in becoming more resilient and prepared for future challenges. And IT modernization, again, that sustained continuous improvement to build and mature our capabilities. We have to keep up that momentum. Agencies were able to move fast, they innovated, and they implemented changes for more operability. And all of that was for the continuity of business operations. Continuity of business operations. Look at what the federal government did. The VA, 40,000 telehealth visits a day they're doing right now. Telehealth, visits, digital. That digital delivery is a necessity. So again, we must not only move faster, we have to keep the momentum that we achieved this year, continue our partnerships with the CFOs, the acquisition personnel to really drive digital transformation and sustain that long-term modernization. And the pandemic really highlighted how fast we could push technology solutions and get through those cumbersome procedures and bureaucracy. We have to continue to use data and technical capabilities to inform that decision making. And we have to continue to be transparent across the federal government as we look from an enterprise perspective at those horizontal opportunities and those vertical opportunities to make sure that we've got fast responses, continue to drive that sustained digital transformation, modernization, and everything we do for mission support. So with that, I'm going to stop talking, and I want to say thank you for your time today, Tom. You've got a great lineup and a great panel set up for today.
Thank you, and thank you to Nagesh. I was he Zoom bombed us. I don't know if you know that. I've had all these security controls, and we get our first Zoom bomb in ATARC histories by a CIO. So we'll definitely, yeah, we'll definitely have to step that up. I should have figured that one out with him. Just one follow-up question. I really like where you're going with this digital transformation. There he is again. Hey Nagesh. Yeah, we'll hear more from that scoundrel later. Digital transformation. Oh, he's a Star Wars guy too, of course. Okay, Mandalorian, pretty good show. I think that was Boba Fett's helmet. Anyway, we're not going to geek out anymore. Digital transformation. I really like what you're saying, and not because we have a digital transformation working group kicking off next week. How do you, and Gwen Costin, your former colleague, always brought this up to me, and I thought I keep borrowing it forever. You know, the experience for Social Security was wheeling your 96-year-old grandmother to get paperwork done. Obviously, pandemic has made it physically impossible to do that. So how, but this is a big problem, because what do I do with the people that were going that worked out of the Social Security office downtown? I want to do this digital transformation, but it's beyond IT. It's workforce management. What have you been hearing from your CIO colleagues about this challenge and how they're addressing it?
So a couple of things, I've seen where, we've done a ton of work on, really doing some pilots and things about reskilling the workforce, right? And there's a couple of agencies that have taken some of their workforce, say the HR footprint, and really starting to train them on things like automation, RPA, and really understanding even human-centered design, right? What that customer journey is and how that's going to change in a post-pandemic world where you may have hybrid interaction with the public, right? You may have hybrid interaction with even the federal workforce, but taking employees and giving them additional skills, additional capabilities. I mean, we've got a data science training program going on right now, a pilot. We've got 60 people in that. But taking the workforce and reskilling them so that they can engage at a digital level, because I think even as we're coming out of the pandemic, there's going to be a hybrid, right? There's still going to be some brick and mortar, but your first interaction may be digital to make that appointment. And when you walk into a building, maybe it's going to be you scan something or you check in, and then maybe you see a person. Because, I'll tell you, my mom is as digital savvy as she is. Sometimes she wants to see somebody, a warm body to talk to. And I think we can't lose sight of that even as we're embarking on this digital transformation. So this is where the workforce comes in and the reskilling.
Great. Well, thank you for that, Maria. Godspeed. Have a good holiday. And thank you for making the time today.
Great. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay. All right. That was Maria Rote, Deputy Federal CIO. And now we're going to go to our Lightning Tech Talks. And these have been a new, I guess we've been doing them since last year. And it's really a distilled version of IT, and really like having some transformational type of activity here. And we just love doing them, and we work with our partners. They do a really good job distilling them. And our first Tech Talk today is going to be with Darren Graham. And Darren is the solutions architect over at Software AG Government Solutions. Darren, can you come on?
Hi, Tom. Good afternoon.
How are you doing? I really like your backdrop. Where are you out of today?
I'm out of Maryland.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming today, and look forward to your talk.
Sure. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Yeah, so good day, everybody. As Tom said, my name is Darren Graham, and I'm a solution architect for Software AG Government Solutions. And I've been working on IT modernization projects for about 2 decades. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about APIs, application programming interfaces, and share some secret ingredients that I've noticed are often part of successful modernization projects. So let's just jump right into it. So in my experience working with large federal and DoD agencies, I sometimes find myself in a situation that I call meeting purgatory. And I suspect you've probably been in meetings like this where you're trying to describe a scenario of how an organization did something that enabled them to achieve success. But sometimes no matter how impactful that story is or how well it's told, or even how applicable it is to the organization, I somehow end up in purgatory. I'm in a room full of opinions of how that specific approach would never work in this organization. And this is what I mean by meeting purgatory. It's two sides that are talking past each other with no common ground in sight. Here's a great example. In one meeting purgatory, I was telling a group about a large agency that's heavily reliant on mainframes to power their organization. Yet they're still really good at modernizing their IT landscape. Of course, the hardware that we see here has been modernized over time, but much of the code and the logic that was written on it and that were built over the decades are still running today. So the engineers within this agency were able to introduce an abstraction layer over their existing systems. And by implementing new APIs, they were able to unlock the data and the logic within that legacy code. And this gave them the ability to kind of keep and leverage that complex processing code base that they had and that had been evolving over the decades. But it also gave them some agility to adopt new and modern languages, bring in new skill sets and deploy new runtimes, which really helped speed the evolution of their systems. And one of the things they did differently became a key pivot point in their ongoing success. They focused on making their team members themselves more valuable. So they coupled this abstraction and API layer with meaningful programs to educate the younger software engineers and bolster their skills with the older legacy languages. And it quickly became apparent to the younger engineers, some of whom are just coming onto their first job right out of school, that being equipped with this in-depth knowledge of these legacy systems made them extremely valuable to the agency and potentially valuable to other agencies as well. So from an agency and an engineering standpoint, it was a win-win situation. And so this is the first secret that I'm going to let you in on that I'll share with you about IT modernization. You've got to bridge the gap and connect the legacy world with the modern world. And this just isn't an architectural problem that's solved with an API layer or abstraction layer or any kind of technology. It's a people problem. And it's not a world-changing concept, but you can't have two different teams, the as is and the to be, and expect to have cohesive results. So bridging the gap provided this agency with a vast resource pool where they could easily allocate resources to either sustaining the key legacy software that had been running for decades, while also taking advantage of these newer languages and runtimes at the same time. But back in my meeting purgatory, the benefits of bridging the gap were not getting anybody excited. In fact, I can remember one engineer who was far more vocal than anybody else. And I close my eyes, I can picture him. He was an older gentleman, had these great big blue eyes and a very pronounced frown. And then before I knew it, more and more of the participants in the meeting were chiming in and really affirming his views. All they could talk about were the blockers within their organization that would prevent this kind of success. Now, I agree that certain challenges are problems for any effort, especially modernization. Things like lack of skill sets, little support from management, maybe absence of tooling, maybe a combination of all of these things. But their main focus was on the scale of the problem. And they argued their systems were so large and complex that modernization using an API-based approach would never work. They said the approach wouldn't scale to satisfy the tempo of change in their organization. But they didn't have any alternative plans, so they weren't scaling anyway. And so this leads me to another modernization secret that I suspect probably won't be a surprise for anybody. You have to start. I mean, it seems like a simple concept, but there's a reason we have phrases like analysis paralysis and perfect is the enemy of good. And the Chinese proverb so eloquently puts it, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first single step. Start with one API on one interface, on one system. You'll never get to the top of the mountain unless you take your first step. And this reminds me of a story that the famous actor Will Smith tells about his childhood. So when he was about 12 years old, his father assigned a task to him and his younger brother to build a new brick wall for the front of their shop. And after months of tedious effort every day after school, the progress was really slow and discouraging. And Smith said to himself, there will be nothing but a giant hole here forever. But some 18 months later, he and his brother were able to stand back and marvel at this massive wall that they had completed together. And I believe this is a testament to starting with the first step. Now, when I was 12, instead of building a wall, I was learning to become a software engineer on my VIC-20. Now, my computer had a special expansion pack that my dad built, which boosted the RAM to a whopping 32K. And I thought, with this, there's nothing that I couldn't do. I thought this computer would carry me well into the future. But let's fast forward and take a look at how massive a shift there is in home computing. We're talking about millions of a percent improvement at a fraction of the cost. My point is that technology, software, even people will continue to improve around you, sometimes at breakneck speed. And I believe that organizations need to combine the evolutions of their systems along with the growth of their teams. And this needs to be part of the underlying culture of the organization. And this brings me to the last secret that I'm going to share with you today. There are so many drivers that justify the reasons for modernizing IT. Certainly cost is a primary factor, and I could probably rattle off 3 or 4 others. But the secret is that to be successful, organizations need to foster the will for change. Embracing something means to desire it. And when I think back to my meeting in my meeting purgatory with my grumpy cat, it underscores my belief that this is really a people problem. And in my experience, the organizations that truly embrace the journey are the ones that can achieve repeatable success. So real quick recap, bridge the gap between the worlds, make sure you start and not get paralyzed, and embrace the change. And so that concludes my talk today. Really appreciate everybody listening and the chance to present to you today. Hope you enjoy the rest of the virtual summit, and I'll hand it back to you, Tom.
Darren, that was fantastic. And I think that first of all, you brought flashbacks with the VIC-20 because I remember you'd program everything in and you'd like miss one semicolon and now your laser and your Starship wouldn't fire. So that was fantastic. I really think when I worked on the digital government strategy back in 2012, one of the very underrated things was we talked about APIs. And I don't think you can do digital transformation or IT modernization without some kind of API strategy. I know we have a lot of federal employees on there. What is your agency's API strategy? Because if you don't have one, it's going to be really hard to do all these other really cool things in digital transformation. So thank you for that, Darren. I really
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Okay. All right. Next up, we have Greg Buchholz, and Greg is the Senior Vice President over at CLM at DocuSign. And Greg, we got you coming on. I think we need some video from you, Greg. There you are.
There you go.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
I think Maria kind of teed you up a little bit, this IDEA Act. And I know we've talked to you guys a lot about that, how important, how important is eliminating these paperwork processes. I think we've only been working in that in the federal government since, about 1976. So we're trying to get there. So, Greg, hopefully you can show us the way here.
Yeah, I should marry that up with the Darren slides there, because I remember the Commodore days as well.
Commodore 64. I'll let you go.
I assume everybody can hear me and see my screen. First of all, thanks for having me, and the whole entire DocuSign team appreciates the opportunity we have to talk to you today. It was interesting with Maria talking about how much change has occurred since March, and the only thing I can think of is that it's not going to slow down, that I think that we've opened the floodgates, and modernizing in general, digitizing and anything else is just, it's the future, and we may never see it move as slow as we saw it in the past. So I'm here to talk to you about really modernizing your agreement processes, which involve paperwork and files. When I when I think about it, people often talk about, you know, the government is larded with paperwork. Clearly, this industry has more than any other industry, but everybody is dealing with the same problem. At the federal level, we have, you know, doing research found that the government spends $40 billion a year in paperwork. That is a bit unique, and a lot of it is based on what's coming inbound versus outbound. And I'm here to talk to you about some solutions for really getting rid of the paperwork, but really streamlining your entire processes. So for those of you who use DocuSign either in business or personal, if I was in person, I'd ask how many people have signed something digitally. And typically 9 out of 10 would raise their hand that they've used DocuSign in one form or fashion. But in reality, that's like one step in your entire modernizing process. So what DocuSign has created is what we call the Agreement Cloud. And I'll get into the components here a little bit, but really the message today is you may have started with electronic signature, but it's time to modernize your entire process from beginning to end. And so we break it down in any business process. It could be a contract, a permit, an HR activity, something with an agreement, a contract, a document involved that has 4 key components. And today, and this goes for all manners of companies that I deal with, both commercial and federal, the first step is a prepare step. And what we mean by prepare is you've got to generate the document. And it could be coming from a template. You may be bringing in data from a third-party system. An API, as Darren mentioned, may be the starting point that helped you get there. But quite many times today, someone is actually manually doing it and in a paper process, and then never leaves that paper process. So the preparation is the first phase. The signing piece, which we all know, and again, DocuSign's core is the key component. But the act and manage are really downstream. The way I articulate it, that signature often is a bit like the iceberg, where you just got the tip showing. But after you've completed the process, someone has got to update records. There may be a billing, accounting process, and then at the back end, which is huge in the federal government, is, okay, my repositories, my records management, what are my rules here? What's my security? What's my permissioning? So that the sign component really is just one of the 4 key things. And when you do it in a manual fashion, we're all human, we're gonna make mistakes. It can lead to errors. We find when people have to manually enter data, we're just gonna have some agreements that are wrong. The version may be wrong, the content may be wrong. Friction is a problem because it gets involved into an email back and forth. That's the typical way I see things today. And I'd say downstream now, particularly with the government, both for the citizens who really, you're here to serve them and achieve your mission, but it's also for your own employees. Gosh, these broken systems just make working with the agency internally, externally more difficult. And with the pandemic, we have all gotten used to more modernizing, more ways of doing things, including how do my groceries get delivered? How do I order food? I don't think that's going back. I think this is only going to accelerate going forward. So DocuSign built the Agreement Cloud to essentially deal with all 4 of these key components in any of your processes, and think of us as a platform. So when I say DocuSign, people will say, oh, you're the signature people. And I say, yes, that's one component of what we do today, but we have an entire platform, each with components that you can decide which you need, but that can help with your end-to-end. So if I go back to the prepare, sign, act, and manage, we have all these products on the left-hand side that help you generate sort of step 1 of your agreement process. The signature piece, which you all know, we're actually building a really exciting remote notary, which sometime next year we'll have kind of a Zoom element where you'll be able to put everybody in the room on a camera for the notarization event. On the more advanced things, contracts lifecycle management, we do permitting, we do correspondence, we do everything in other parts of your organization that may or may not need a signature, but you need to modernize. And just a quick image of what we built, and I'm showing here kind of a contract lifecycle management screen, but what we're doing for the agency, which ultimately leads to results for your citizens and your employees, we are automating your manual tasks. And one way we do that is we have built 105 workflow engine steps that are drag and drop. It's like a Visio diagram that helps you move things along, that take away these manual processes, take away issues with just basic email. And we're all here to both eliminate unnecessary risk, but I'd say more than anything else today, what I see is just for people to enjoy their job more and for people to appreciate and work better with their third parties, which could be your vendors, it could be your citizens, could be your partners. But we're all expecting more of each other from this, and so you can't really get left behind. You can't be the one who's clogging up the internal system here. DocuSign has spent a great deal of time on key things for agencies around security and privacy. We are FedRAMP moderate. We have a DoD IL4 in process that should be completed sometime this year. And because the company has a very large commercial division, we have all kind of commercial security, the SOC 1, SOC 2, the ISO standards, and also GDPR and other things that people would care about in Europe. But the company is very, very serious about security and privacy. Again, since a lot of what we're doing in the signing process has personal identifiable information, this is really, really important to us. It's very interesting. So we are in many of the federal agencies, but we're in all 50 states. We've got 1,500 cities, counties, again, all different use cases. It is actually this fastest growing segment within DocuSign, making tremendous investments next year. The IL4 data center is just one of them. So we're very excited to work with everyone on the phone here. I appreciate the time, Tom. And I look forward to doing these with you in the future. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I will say, I think the e-notary is like pure genius. I think that's going to be a big thing, and you can probably expand the usage of that. And then I really like the automate the manual task part. Full disclosure, we use your product, and instead of, it's like you could put it on Terminator mode where you're constantly bugging the person that you require something back from, right? So it really helps, and we keep talking about, eliminating these duties. It's hard to remember who you send emails to, but using your product, at least for this contract stuff, it really helps automate it. So we're really excited to have you guys involved. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, and I think now that you've signed a few of these digitally, like when someone says, here, Tom, here's an email. I need you to print it. I need you to sign it in blue ink. I need you to scan it and send it back to me. Aren't you a little bit annoyed versus the first one?
Yep. And so next week we have our digital transformation working group, and one of the project teams is digitization, because I don't think we've ever we're getting closer and closer, but we're not to that point where we're taking out manual physical paper, and I think we need to get there. So thank you a lot for that, Greg. That was really
thank you.
Helpful.
Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. All right. Thank you, Greg. And thank you, DocuSign. Our next introduction, I've got a moderator. The next moderator is Dave Powner. And Dave recently, hi, Dave. And you're out of Colorado, I imagine, today. But anyway, Dave is the recently executive director of the Center for Data-Driven Policy, and used to work for GAO. And Dave is the guy that you'd always see, you'd be watching C-SPAN walking through Congress, and he's like testifying. So most people never want to testify for Congress. This man over here to my left on my thing, he's always testifying for Congress, and he actually does a really, really good job. So really excited to hear maybe a little bit about what you're doing in your day job, and then I'll let you introduce your panel. Thank you, Dave.
Very good. Well, thank you, Tom. I appreciate the invite, and looking forward to moderating this panel today. Yeah, you might, or I've been there about 2 years since leaving the federal government, and I still get to work with a number of CIOs, so that's very exciting through some of our FFRDCs. But we also just recently rolled out a Center for Data-Driven Policy, where we continue to do a lot of work up on the Hill. and also out of the Executive Office of the President. So still a lot of interaction with OMB and the like. So looking forward to continuing that. But this afternoon, Tom, so we plan to discuss with a very impressive panel what we learned from the COVID experience, what are the success stories, and what we can build off of to further modernize government IT. This is something that Maria mentioned in her opening keynote. As we all know, there have been many good things that came out of this experience. The government did demonstrate its agility. We found new ways to recruit talent, and we're really looking forward to hearing from our panelists on these topics and others. And it's a pleasure to introduce our 6 very experienced panelists today. They are Allison McCall, Acting CIO, NTIS, Department of Commerce; Francisco Salguero, CIO at the FCC; Von Noga, CIO at EPA; Nagesh Rao, there you are, Nagesh, Acting CIO, Bureau of Industry and Security at the Department of Commerce; McGuigan, CIO at the State Department; and then finally, Tony Holmes, Practice Lead for Solutions Architects and Public Site. So what we're going to do, because the panelists have such extensive backgrounds, I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves further and talk a little bit about themselves. And also, I'd like them then to conclude their introduction by highlighting what they are most proud of with their contributions to their organization's pandemic response. And with that, why don't we go ahead and start with Allison. Allison, you there?
There we go. Can you hear me? No?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, good. Yeah, my screen just disappeared. I think, like a lot of CIOs around the area, we actually had a very positive response to the COVID situation. It was a shock, but fortunately, our staff was equipped for teleworking. We had just, we all had the same laptops that we could bring home and still access our information safely. Everyone was trained, and we had a few, mostly people who hadn't wanted to telework in the past were a bit shocked that suddenly they found themselves at home working. But the experience went very smoothly. We had one application with sensitive data. We did eventually have to reconfigure that so that the staff could access just that application securely. And that worked very well, and in fact has been used at other agencies. My background is both in private industry and the government. In the government, I've worked at Commerce for the past 5 years, and in between was in private industry, and before that worked for the Department of Justice. David, have I covered everything, or?
Yeah, that sounds
Okay.
great, Allison. We're going to come back to you for another round of success stories.
Sure.
Why don't we hop over to Vaughn? Vaughn, you want to?
And thanks for having this panel. I think it's going to be a great discussion today. Like Dave said, my name is Von Noga. I'm the CIO for the Environmental Protection Agency. I've been at the agency since 2008. And I've seen a lot of things since 2008. I think from an EPA perspective, just reflecting on what we've done, we were well prepared, but we weren't perfectly prepared. I think one of the things, if you're familiar with government, annually we do continuity of government operations exercises. And I can tell you since 2008, I've never seen an exercise where it was all of government. And so I think, one of the things that we've added to the playbook was the pandemic response, which means you have to totally look at preparations, how you're preparing your employees, how you're preparing your infrastructure, where you're looking at landing new applications. I think it gives us a totally different perspective going forward. Looking at the agency, one of the things I tell folks all the time is, from an IT practitioner, if I'm being ignored, that's a good thing. That means we're delivering on what we should be delivering on. The employees are able to successfully execute their mission, and that's a good thing. I think, you know, what I'm most proud of during the response, with the exception for the first couple of weeks, I think everyone was going through that, oh my gosh, we've got to scale up. Do we have VPNs in place? Do we have enough licenses? Do we have enough bandwidth? Again, the same things that everyone else was dealing with. I think one of the things, you know, that we saw pretty quickly is that we could meet the needs of the agency fairly quickly. We'd already implemented almost nearly 100% laptop provisioning before then. So everyone had a laptop. People were familiar with teleworking, although not everyone was familiar with full-time telework. But we thought we had, you know, a great plan. We were well provisioned, and then the reality of a prolonged response sets in. And so one of the things that I'm most proud of is really the ability of the team. And when I say the team, it's not just the IT team; it's the mission support folks, the folks who work in HR, the folks who work in IT, the folks who work in finance, the folks who are behind the scenes ensuring that the mission EPA gets executed and our folks have what they need to do their job. We came together and we identified one really critical thing. We're still hiring people. People are still being onboarded. They still need to be provisioned. They still need to have access to systems. They need to have systems. We had to totally rethink the business process of provisioning an employee for their first day of work. And you know, one of the things that we did fairly quickly within the first month, we had pivoted to all remote provisioning. We basically drop shipped computers and devices and things like that to the employees' homes on their first day of work. We did oath of office over you know, our teleconferencing platform, which is Microsoft Teams. We remoted in and got their computers configured, got them productive within the first day of them being on the job. And one of the things that, you know, that we take away from that is, while we've modified and improved a lot of business processes, we need to continue doing this, right? One of the things that I've said is we can't go back, right? So we've improved how we provision people. We've improved how we secure the infrastructure. We've improved and reduced the amount of printing that goes on in the agency. We're saving dollars. Let's continue that, right? So some of the previous conversations they talked about digitization. That's a huge thing that we're looking at here within the agency is how do we go all digital, right? We need to move away from paper, and that's, you know, one of the things you look at from a federal perspective. It is kind of Achilles heel when all your paper's at the office and you're not allowed to go in the office. So that really is becoming a focal point for us, and I'm sure it's becoming a focal point for a lot of folks that are on this panel. So Dave, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you, Vaughn. Francisco,
Yes, good afternoon. So first of all, thank you for having me here. I really think it's a good forum and to hear the different stories. So I'm Francisco Salguero again, the CIO for the Federal Communications Commission. I've actually been with the FCC. This is actually the first year, right? So this week is my 1-year anniversary, if you will. So I've actually been virtually working remotely more than I've actually been in the office. So this has actually been the reality for me here at the time of the commission. You know, from our side of things, as many agencies face the challenges of going into remote work. We had the, you know, capabilities of telework. So that's always been there. But as many have seen, telework doesn't necessarily always mean remote work for the whole of the office. So talking about continuity of operations and making sure we not only understand things from a disaster recovery, it's changed our disaster recovery plan, because the expectation now, as I think a key word that Vaughn just mentioned is digitization. We're in a digital type of environment. So it's no longer about just modernization, which is viewed upon as an IT thing, right? It's the infrastructure, it's all the whiz-bang applications and systems and how we deliver them. But it's also now more so, how do we get those capabilities in the user's hands that they can actually use them? You know, the FCC is historically been about talking to people. You have, you know, one-on-one, face-to-face communications, meetings, you know, whether you're in the office or going to conference room. That's been the operations that folks have really been used to. So get them to work in a digital reality. One example is we're a big VDI shop. So we do virtual desktop infrastructure. Well, your thin clients don't come equipped, you know, initially with camera. It doesn't come with microphones, all these things. So there really wasn't a need for video conferencing capabilities outside of conference rooms and things of that sort. So we didn't have those capabilities on the onset of this pandemic, right? And then depending on how you look at it, nobody knew how long this would take. Some folks might have thought it would be a few months. You know, I don't think many of us thought we'd be a year into this, because it just, that's the reality of it. And so really, folks weren't used to using different tools from a video conferencing perspective. So that's one of the things that we had to come up very speed quickly. And how do we roll these things out for those capabilities and also get the training and make it intuitive enough for the users to actually leverage them, right? Just you can't just deliver technology and expect people to be able to start, you know, using them, you know, with no problems. And that's one of the things is delivering technologies in a way that is more consumer, technology savvy than actually just technical for technical sake, which is in our world, right? Which is what we take care of. So I think that's one of the main challenges that we ran into is how do we get not only just that is one example for video, but everything else that takes, as talked about in the previous presenter on Adobe, you know, did further. How do we make sure that we're not reliant upon people passing paper from desk to desk? You know, leveraging various platforms or single platform for document management as well as collaboration and testing and things like that. You know, what I would say is one of the things I'm most proud of when it really came to this COVID and pandemic is in April of this year, we actually had the telehealth application developed. And that was part of the response that we as the federal government had on COVID, right? So we had to provide the healthcare providers ability to apply for and receive funding for their needs, IT and telecom needs, to deliver medical needs virtually to the citizens. And so we actually developed an application in 3 weeks, in less than 3 weeks time actually. So that was a record for us here at the FCC, you know, leveraging a SaaS type platform. And from that sake, really from the beginning of saying we have now to get the applications, review them, process them, and actually issue funds, we actually deliver a workable and solution within 3 weeks. And within 1 month, we had the whole process completed. That included financial operations integration, as well as public announcements and public notices that we had to also provide that by regulation. So that's just one of the various things. And as many of us had to go through this challenge, the first 2 weeks was basically all-nighters, getting people equipped. Because even as a VDI shop, where we're reliant upon our employees to leverage some of their devices at home, whether they're computers, to log in, what you find out is, as again I mentioned, this has been about telework, not remote work. So not everyone was telework ready, right? And for us, the challenge was less on the VPN side because we didn't initially issue out laptops, but it's for those folks that were more of the used to being in the office, doing everything face to face and manually, may not have a computer at home. As much as we might, for us as IT folks, might find it a little shocking, that's just the reality, right? That not everyone is equipped like they need to actually move forward in this new digital world.
Well, thank you, Francisco. Appreciate that. Stuart.
Can you hear me? Let me just do a mic check.
Yep.
Excellent. I had an audio failure in my last meeting, so it's good to know. I'm Stuart McGuigan, the CIO for the State Department. I'm on my 21st month. It's my first tour in the federal government, but more than 3 decades of IT in the commercial space, half of which has been as a CIO, most recently 7 years as a CIO for Johnson & Johnson. So I came here used to very large multinational bureaucracies. And I think the thing that I am most delighted with is the speed with which the State Department IRM group pivoted to acting like a very flat organization, pivoted to an agile model of repeated iterative delivery, and the grace under pressure that everyone showed, because the State Department, much like we heard from my colleagues here, was very much a face-to-face organization, fly to places, meet with other diplomats and foreign government leaders, and not really any kind of culture for telework, less than 10%. And at our peak, we hit over 90% of people working effectively outside of the office. So that was a major change for us. And I think one of the residual effects that is going to add tremendous value for years to come is because we had to, everybody got comfortable with collaborative technology. Everybody got comfortable with WebEx. Everybody got comfortable with Teams. And our ability now to transcend time zones and geography and create virtual collaborative teams is a place where we wouldn't have been 5 years from now with all the money spent on change management in the world. And the analogy that I use, because it's familiar with my colleagues, is the best way to learn a language is to be dropped in the country and try to survive. However much training you have, you quickly learn how to navigate the world. The same thing is with the collaborative technology. When that is the only way to get things done, then everyone figured out more or less how to do it. And, doing it for 9 months now or more, it's becoming second nature. So that gives us a platform, not just a technology platform, but a culture and an operational know-how within the department to really amplify what we do. We produce analysis, we produce documents, we produce strategies and recommendations, and that depends on the speed with which we can get the experts together to analyze and agree. And I think we're looking at the future of diplomacy being this more closer to the speed of technology, less reactive, more proactive, and more real time, which is very, very exciting. Over.
Good. Thank you, Stuart. Nagesh.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. And it's a pleasure to be here today. It was kind of a unique situation for me because I started the pandemic, working with the pandemic issues over at SBA, helping Maria Road out, right? So I was helping her out as the Director of Business Technology Solutions and was putting up all the technology solutions that were used for PPP and IDLE. That was all done by my team. We were building all of that out on the spot. And we're flying, by the seat of our pants kind of thing, because the legislation was going into play. We're trying to think out what the technical architecture would have to be, and keeping in mind what the current policy rules are going to be required, and pivoting over the weeks ahead in case there are any changes happen, right? So like when the application's going in, getting processed, and going through its rigmarole, we had to keep in mind that, well, there might be changes in what fields are going to be collected, or if there's going to be additional information that's going to be required, or an additional add-on feature, or data curation or sharing. So, you look at it from a topological perspective, and then you're building into it pretty quickly as to like, all right, well, if X, then Y, and then Y, then Z, but if not that, then being prepared for the alternative variables in play. So that was one interesting facet for me. And what was funny for both Maria and I was we were both about to leave around that time to take on new jobs. And then we saw this all going down, and we said, all right, time out. We're going to stay put. We're going to get this done. We're going to get this done right. And then once we've got it in a stable state, we'll both bounce to our next adventure, which, Maria's at OMB, and now I'm at the Bureau of Industry and Security. And what's interesting for me is that career pivot I did for myself. After I got everything stabilized and got a really good Tiger team with my colleagues and my staff at SBA, and felt confident that they were going at it, I transitioned midstream over at Commerce, where I went from a civilian helping small businesses, very small agency, to a bureau that handles national security and law enforcement matters. And that pivot was very unique for me too, because all of a sudden I'm going into a more controlled kind of situation, trying to figure out what the technology solutions would need to be for an agency that deals with very sensitive, classified kind of data and information at play. And and right now we're in the process of finishing up the modernization efforts. We just finished the Windows 7 to Windows 10 deployment for our bureau, which was nice. That was a very, over the last 5 months I've been here so far, I've got that done. And right now we're turning on O365 and a number of other collaboration suite of tools, but it's coming into this very unique situation for me, for a agency that is a little bit more restrictive. How do I, one, deal with the culture and change management with the use of technology adoption, but two, figuring out what the appropriate tools are supposed to be for a bureau that has to deal with sensitive and classified information that is very different from the rest of the civilian agencies in government. So it's been a wild ride, and it's, you know, this guy's been keeping me company a lot in the office here at HQ at Commerce. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Nagesh. Tony.
Hi, thanks, Dave. I think so what we do. Let me start with the beginning first. I guess what we do is we help federal agencies apply an agile methodology to learning outcomes, along with sort of deploying artificial intelligence in a much more flexible way than perhaps they've been used to. I guess. So the thing that sits behind all of this is all of us have seen teams during COVID have significantly more downtime. Maybe not significantly, but there's more downtime than there was. And training and upskilling tends to kind of get pushed to back of mind while we're trying to deal with all these other things that are going on. And I think what we've done most of all is we've helped our federal customers understand that this is actually an opportunity to help their people who they need to be able to pivot. And we've heard this all the way through from everybody that's been talking so far, is we need to pivot to adjust to these changing challenges. It's not getting any easier to hire technologists right now. You know, despite what's happening anywhere else in the world with unemployment and COVID, it's certainly not happening in our sector. So our cloud employees, our security employees, all of our technologists are still just as hard to hire. So what we have to do is we have to apply a methodology to our skilling, our upskilling, and our cross-skilling, so we can pivot to meet those new challenges. And the way that we do that is to find ways that we can take opportunities that are presented to us with the downtime, as I already mentioned, and compress the time to skills as much as possible by understanding our skills inventory, understanding exactly where we are at the moment, in order to allow us to strategically identify anything that's missing. So as we go forward through this challenge, we can kind of look forward and predict potentially what we might need. I think one of the biggest problems that we face with I suppose the human condition is we tend to have this approach to the world that our tomorrows are going to be just like our todays. And I think one thing that COVID's shown us is that's not the case. So that's probably, you know, the thing that I'm most proud of is being able to help federal agencies reimagine the learning concepts, reimagine how we go about it and how we go about staffing and keeping our people engaged. And then being able to implement that culture of learning and see success come from that.
Well, thank you. And we've actually been joined by an additional panelist. So Andre Mendez, thank you for joining us this afternoon. We weren't quite sure you're going to be here, so I apologize up front for not having you at the very beginning, but we're just going around giving a little more background on ourselves. Andre is the CIO at the Department of Commerce. And we've asked the panelists initially to talk about what they're most proud of with their organization's response to the pandemic.
Very good. Separating it into two different issues. One relating to the Department of Commerce itself and the OCIO within that and our relationship with the bureaus, where we were able to basically seamlessly go into a full 100% telework with no disruption. I mean, there may be 3 or 4 individuals across the board at DOC that experienced problems, but that was inconsequential. The bureaus themselves, with a very large number of of both FTEs and contractors were at 100% telework, or almost 99 point something, with the folks in the SCIFs and some folks in laboratories, or with no weather environments, in literally within a couple of weeks. So that was really a testament to not only the ability to respond to the issue and adaptability, but also to a lot of the programs and methodologies that we had deployed prior to the pandemic, where telework and geographic abstraction was already a huge part of the equation. For example, with ITA, they are basically operating at 100% cloud-based, period, for everything. And so being in the office, being in China, being in India, being in Fairfax, Virginia, or Germantown, Maryland, is exactly the same thing to everybody. And so very proud of that. At the same time, I think that we were able to conduct all of the business that we needed to conduct, even if the pandemic was not there, regardless of the circumstances. The biggest case that comes to mind, and where we performed, I believe, admirably, was with the census, where all of a sudden we had delays in schedules by virtue of proximity, social distancing, and all of that. We had to dramatically ramp up the number of people that we had to operate at the same time in a compressed window. And nevertheless, the census individuals, their IT and the decennial program, produced the largest amount and percentage of households that were cataloged and taken care of, tracked in the history of the census, at 99.98 or something along those lines. Don't hold me to that exact percentage, but very, very close to that. And with the caveat that the only places where we were not able to actually enumerate were in South Louisiana because of back-to-back storms, hurricanes, that actually made it virtually impossible to do so. And so at the same time, we also had an enormous amount of new programs that fell into the lap of some of our bureaus, for example, with EDA and the distribution of literally billions of dollars in grants that needed to take place in very, very short order associated with the CARES Act. And that was performed flawlessly. Just to give you an idea, I mean, the amount of increase of funds that EDA normally would distribute versus what they have to distribute this year is literally, exponential. Literally exponential, and not exponential like people use it when they mean arithmetic, but literally exponential. And they did so with aplomb and by, quite literally by hook and by crook, whatever it took. Whether it was engineering really quick Excel-based solutions that would allow you to do it, leveraging tools that were already in place, but anything that was necessary in order to get the money out the door to the people that really needed it. At the DOC, we basically completed 12 out of the 12 items that I had set up in the technical statement of direction that I issued almost exactly a year ago. And because those were so aggressive, getting those all done in this time frame is really a tribute to the folks at the Department of Commerce that basically took this as an opportunity to just put pedal to the metal. And chief amongst them was the fact that the HCHB network is now connected to the internet and to the filtering systems via N-Wave NOAA capability, which dramatically increased our resilience and reliability and throughput, while at the same time dramatically reducing our costs. It was a long-term project that was in the books for 6 or 7 years, and we got it done in 6 months. Boom. So very proud of that. But people really responded. Very, very proud of the entire team across the entire Department of Commerce, including folks like Nagesh that came on board, and in the midst of all of this, got the stuff done.
Yeah, so I wanted, Dave, I'm really glad Andre's here because I have to give Andre a massive shout out. He made my transition over to commerce really seamless, and his team has been stellar. The modernization efforts that I'm able to do at BIS is because of Andre and his vision, because he's allowing me to leverage the enterprise solution approach that he's doing. And I think this goes back to what all of us here are doing as CIOs, that counsel, that brain trust that's through ATARC, CIO Council, the Commerce Councils, Federal CIO Council. Like Andre immediately empowered me. He said, hey, if Maria's asking you to go serve on the innovation subcommittee, go ahead, do it. You know, this is good for us. And so I have to give Andre like massive props, because part of the issue I was dealing with the Windows 7 to Windows 10 migration, it was his team that helped me kind of figure out a better, faster solution to deploy those devices faster. So I'm just leveraging off different playbooks, and with this collective brain trust, we continue to build off on it. We can definitely do a lot more together.
Excellent. Well, that's a nice lead into our next question, Nagesh. And I really want to thank all of you for sharing a lot of great stories and successes to share across the board. And the CIO job isn't easy, so we really appreciate what you all do. Kind of building off the setup that Maria had, where there's all these things we did and lessons learned from the pandemic experience. How can we take, I'm interested in maybe going around the horn again, about 2 minutes each given our time. How can we take those lessons learned, and what are some ideas, strategies that we can really use to forward more modernization and digitization? I mean, we got infrastructure that's left to modernize, and Maria mentioned the big legacy challenges we have that are more of a long-term outlook. So I'd be interested in hearing your takes on that. So if we can kind of limit it to 2 minutes, and if we have a few minutes left, I think Tony has told us he's going to take one of those instruments off the wall and sing us a song here at the end. But we could go ahead and start with Allison.
There we go. Yes, some of the lessons learned, I think, from the pandemic are, number one, I think if you can standardize your regular commodity IT and make it as standard as possible across the organization, that enhances issues that you encounter. You can support remotely without having to enter the person's workspace to do, oh yeah, I have that problem on my laptop too. It makes provisioning new equipment much easier. So having a standard environment, I think, really helps telework and the situation that we're undergoing now. And also, as others have mentioned, being able to access your data centrally, paperless, smoothly. And I think if we think in those veins, instead of the old-fashioned person at the desk in their office, but the ability to access what they need to do their job from anywhere smoothly in a standard fashion, I think will go a long way.
Excellent. Thank you, Allison. Francisco.
Sure. Thank you. So I think that's a key. Standardization is extremely important. In addition to that is knowledge management. When I say that, it's about knowledge base and documentation. You know, a lot of times we are quick to develop a solution, especially at the help desk. As an example, you know, they're quick to help a user and say, okay, well, you need to click here, do this, do that, and all of a sudden everything's working. But if you don't memorialize it and start developing kind of your knowledge base behind that, it's very difficult to recreate it for other users and be able to, you know, say, here's a standard way of the way we solve certain issues. So that's one of the things I think that we take as a lesson learned, not only for the help desk, but just overall. I mean, we always preach about documentation and project management, and we do that, especially with big endeavors, but little things can also help, because those do help us prevent from it becoming bigger. So that's one of the things that, you know, I would take from this pandemic is the documentation becomes enormously important when you no longer have the ability to have your archives sitting in somebody's desk or file cabinet.
Excellent. Francisco, thank you. Juan.
Yeah, I mean, so this is like a target-rich environment when we talk about modernization, and I'm really, I mean, if folks have heard me before, I'm not a huge fan of using the term IT modernization, because we almost characterize it as a discrete activity. when modernization should not be a discrete activity, it should be continual. I think one of the things that we've learned is if you're in a position where you're asking questions about, well, why didn't we do this, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, then we've let it get too far, right? And I think one of the things that we've certainly seen is the pace of technology and the advancement of technology forces you to look at it all the time, right? You have to reevaluate, your infrastructure, your applications, that domain to make sure we're still providing value services, to our employees, and they're still getting the benefits. From a going paperless and a digitization, that's one of what I call one of my wildly important goals. I've actually got two. One around go paperless, which is not a singular activity within the CIO shop. It's across the agency. So we've engaged across the board of identifying where are those opportunities where we can go paperless pretty quickly, from information collection requests where they've historically come in as a paper. How do we transform that, right? How do we go from a paper-based activity to a fully digitized, and how do we repeat that, right? It shouldn't be a one-off. Once you develop that, you should be able to replicate that pretty quickly. I think the other thing we're looking at is certainly, access to information. We've seen that. I'm certain all my colleagues across the other federal agencies have seen the same thing. People can't come into the office and get to their paper files, right? So how are we focusing on that? What do we need to do? And how do we need to implement digitization technologies? One of the WIG's wildly important goals that we established 2 years ago, and that we're executing on, even in the midst of pandemic, is how do we consolidate and centralize digitization activities? How do we, instead of doing it across every location, we say, what, we're going to establish digitization centers. We're going to put the technologies out there. We're going to do it for the agency, and they're going to be our biggest partners in this. And those are some of the wildly important goals we established. And it's not one activity underneath digitization, it's multiple activities. And it's not, are we done yet? It's, we're done now, but what are the next things? How do we build on the success, and what do we need to look in 2021? What do we need to go in 2022? It's really building that pipeline of opportunities and successes as we go. So I think there's from an EPA perspective, we've taken on the challenges of standardizing the desktop. I think as we evaluate the pandemic, there's certainly opportunities to optimize that. And again, that's another one of our wildly important goals, is optimize the IT infrastructure. How do we make it so simple to provision and to service a remote worker? How do you make it, easy for them to get the service and support that they need, right? Whenever and wherever. That's really an approach that I took way back in 2009 is, work is what you do, not where you are. So if you really think about it in those terms, and you start architecting your environment with that in mind, then you start doing the right things. You start deploying 100% laptops. You start building out your VPN. You start moving away, quite frankly, from full-time VPNs. I think with newer technologies, certainly a lot of my colleagues have implemented cloud solutions for mail and for collaboration. That is the future, right? So if we're still talking and thinking about where we go into the cloud, we're already behind, right? It's, we don't have to go and drag people. They're at our doors knocking, saying, can we get there, and can we get there tomorrow? And I think that's one of the opportunities that the CIOs and the IT shops have across federal agencies is we've got an engaged customer base. I think the business side of certainly environmental protection recognizes, hey, we need to move there. We need to optimize how we're delivering our services internally and externally to our stakeholders.
Excellent. Thank you, Vaughn. Stuart.
Well said by all my colleagues. So I'm going to take a slightly different dimension, but one I think is more lasting and maybe more critical for the State Department. And that is for the period with which we were working together with our various bureaus to get people capable of doing their jobs, we were able to do two things, I think, extremely well without really thinking about it. The first one was that we, and again, we didn't use these words, is that we had the ability to implement minimum viable products because we had a long queue, and not having access to your applications meant that your bureau, your group wasn't functioning at all. So people are aware that there was this big queue of work we had to do. And then we could say, okay, here's the basic essential capabilities that we need to provide you so you can work from your home or whatever other location. And we're not going to add any more bells and whistles, but we'll get back to you because we're going to be iterating daily. And if there are things you need that you find out are essential to doing your job, we will add them, and we'll add them in the short term. So this concept of minimum viable product, which is, my experience, one of the most difficult to implement, but is so essential to agile and iterative, was one dimension. And then the flip side of that same coin is, because we are focusing on only those things that are needed, we had no unnecessary requirements and no waste. And so our ability to purely focus on those IT activities and capabilities that were directly tied to business enablement, mission enablement, and business value meant that that relationship between IT and the business was very tight. And no one was arguing, we weren't arguing for funding or budget, because our business partners were arguing, because they could see how the things we're doing very specifically were required for success. And in our next budget discussion, we took the stand in IRM that once we cover our basic infrastructure, cyber, and all those things we're responsible for, any new investment is a business discussion. And if you don't want new capabilities and new systems, we don't want them either. That's not the business we're in. That's more work for us. But if you want them, then let's get into a discussion about exactly why. What are you going to be able to do tomorrow you can't do today? Very specifically. And that intimate tie between business need and very clear process enablement and the metrics that go with it meant that we were spending money probably more precisely and creating more value per taxpayer dollar than is typically the case. And we're really gripping on with two hands to hold that posture as we move forward. Crisis or no crisis, we should be only doing those things that are absolutely essential to accomplish the mission, no more and no less, and then iterating and using the time that we freed up to do more and more and more and more.
Excellent. Thank you, Stuart. Nagesh.
I'll be brief. And to be fair to my colleagues, I think, again, leveraging enterprise solutions and leveraging the brain trust is just going to be super critical more than ever. I got to give the shout out to Andre. He's done a great job with that enterprise approach, with getting the bureaus to connect the dots and leverage off each other's resources, almost as if like mini centers of excellence with all the different bureaus. So like for BIS, we're a bit more FISMA high national security. So, the vision is, how do we serve that kind of community? Whereas, digital service exceptionalism has done well with ITA, as Andre oversaw ITA before he moved over to commerce. And so leveraging the sweet spots that each bureau brings and our capabilities is important. On that additional note, I think the other thing, culture change 101. This has happened now, right? When we go back to work 3, 6, 9 months from now, I don't, when agencies are asked to reoccupy the buildings and whatnot, and that's above my pay grade. That's going to be an interesting situation. We have to navigate that over that bridge. How do we help folks acclimate that work-life balance from working from home to now working back on site and finding that balance between the two?
Great, excellent. And we're going to go to Andre and finish with Tony. And I got the blessing from the big man that we can go 5 minutes over. So we still got time for 2 minutes from each of you. So Andre, you're up next.
Got it. I will try to be brief though. I think that maybe for the first time in history that I'm aware of, I heard from just about every bureau and every agency, I think, in giving kudos to the CIOs and the IT organization for the ability to deal with this pandemic. And that sets up a very, very important, potentially inflection point, where this general recognition that not only is the technology hyper important in everything that we do in normal life, but that these CIOs and these IT departments have come a ridiculously long way from even 10 years ago. The level of skills in the federal government nowadays is, I believe, exceptional and growing. The number of good new young leaders that will come behind old people like me to take over and to really leverage new technologies is continuing to accelerate, and we need to foster that. And so the challenge now is to leverage that into initiatives that, just by the very nature of the way the industry is moving, will tend to eliminate silos of comfort, silos of inefficiency, and silos of duplication. Because I will tell you this, I am not a believer that there's not enough money in federal IT to get our job done. I believe that there's not enough optimization of the money expenditures to really move us to the next level. I think this is an opportunity to go to the next level as such. For Department of Commerce, I think achieving borderless networks and zero trust as identification and access control are going to be absolutely paramount, and we're going to move very quickly in that. And then we really need to start looking at the potential for leveraging new technologies that are maturing very quickly and that can radically change the paradigms that we are using. Specifically, I'm referring to the potential for leveraging 5G as the all-encompassing WAN links and replacing what we have today. The moment that the TICs become accessible, the next generation TIC 3.0 becomes a different issue and does not require that pipe to go there. A world of possibilities opens up in terms of cost leveraging, together with the ability to leverage mobile phones as the de facto platform for computing for just about 95 to 98% of the population that doesn't require high degrees of computational power. So if you look at your cell phone connected by 5G and connected to a docking station via Bluetooth or whatever it is, that has the keyboard and the big screen that we as human beings so desperately need, especially as our eyes start to fail, then you can have a bold new environment where all the provisioning is done in collaboration with cell phone providers, and we reduce an enormous amount of cost and time frames from the equation, because all of a sudden these images are being downloaded into our cell phones on a regular basis, just like all the updates that we get in our applications. So I think that we are at a seminal point where we have, without a shadow of a doubt, established our credibility and reliability as providers, even under the direst of circumstances. And so we need to leverage that to move the organizations to the next level of functioning, as we continue to leverage new technology. So I'm very excited about that. And I think that over the next few years, we'll be able to have massive progress from that standpoint, while increasing our cybersecurity capabilities and being able to function regardless of circumstance, right? Because as much as I hate to admit it, this might not be the last pandemic. As much as I hate to admit it, we have established a new ability to do business that brings new possibilities to the table. The cost savings in real estate could be absolutely dramatic with massive consolidation, while at the same time massive decentralization. So I think I'm very excited for the next 3 to 5 years, and I'm hoping that we're able to really dramatically change the landscape for federal IT.
Excellent, thank you, Andre. Tony, bring us home.
Okay. I won't do it as sung, I'm afraid. Okay, so I guess we've spent a lot of time talking about technologies, but ultimately, when we talk about 5G, when we talk about zero trust and things like this, ultimately the people that get us there are our smart techs, our folks on the front line of technology, if you like, the guys on the ground. So it's really important that the skill modernization is driven from the C-suite, from the executive level. You have to remember that skill development needs to be understood as a part of a technologist's role. For many years, we've had this concept of there's a technologist, he does his role, he has his role, and then he goes away and does his training. Can't do that. They have to come together. The technologist and the training and the skills development have to be considered a part of the role. You need to make sure you have the right data in order to understand how you're going to apply this agile methodology to your training and to your upskilling. Okay, you have to know where you are. We live in the age of data. The federal data strategy that's being pushed out there helps us understand that and hold on to that. So you need the right tools to inform you with that data. The culture of learning also has to come from the C-suite. The culture of learning, giving the C-suite, giving the permission to learn. It's okay to learn. We encourage you to learn. It's something that we embrace as a culture. And once you start to get all of these pieces in place, you have a culture that is much more resilient to staff attrition because they're being engaged in interesting projects and having that technology development that they so urgently want. And you get the ability to embrace much more cross-role diversity. And when we bring abstract ideas from different environments, when our networking guys start working with security, when our operating systems and other guys start working in cloud and things like this, we start to get a much better germination of ideas. Creative problem solving then starts to surface. And I think that's probably the biggest thing. You know, make sure that it's promoted. Make sure people learn, they understand that. Make sure they know the C-suite is behind them. It's approved and encouraged within the organization. Make sure you've got the right tools and the right data and apply that agile methodology. And that's exactly what we try and help our federal customers do today.
Right. Well, thank you, Tony. I want to thank all the panelists for sharing your experience. And again, thank you for what you do on a day in and day out basis. Your jobs are tough and we really appreciate what you do for us. Thank you. Tom, over to you.
Thank you, Dave. That was a great panel. I got so many texts and I was just enjoying it as much as anybody else. And Dave, you know, you're referring to me to the big guy that, you know, I gained a few pounds during pandemic. So I'm very sensitive to that. So I became a bigger guy over pandemic. I'm working on it though, so don't worry. Thanks,
We're in the
Dave.
same boat. It's all right.
Yeah, we'll catch up soon. Thank you so much.
All right, take care.
Okay, great. Next up, we've got Will LaForest, and Will is the public sector CTO over at Confluent. If you can come on, there he is. And I asked you, we should have done a poll question, Will, but where is that vista behind you? I would have been great. I didn't get it wrong. I think I didn't get it right. I was in a different area of the country, but let us know that it's just kind of a striking city there against the backdrop.
Yeah, I asked that I asked that question a lot of times to people because, you know, it's got this sort of Mediterranean rooftops there, but it's right up against the mountains. It's one of my favorite cities, Turin, actually. So great place to visit.
Fantastic. Well, I'm looking forward to your talk. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Awesome. So let me just, I have some visuals while I'm sort of talking through this topic on data fabric. Hopefully everyone can see it now. So I'm really to be honest, I'm gonna avoid talking about any specific technologies in this quick lightning session. And instead, I'm just gonna focus on a trend picking up steam that as government technology leaders, we need to be aware of, and that's the data fabric. For a more detailed look at this topic, feel free to hit my Medium article at the bit.ly link here, posted on the screen. It's really only a 10-minute read, but it does go into some of the open source options available in building one. Let's see here. So while this trend, or maybe this architectural pattern is a better way to put it, has had numerous names, industry has really started to coalesce on this term of data fabric. And it's kind of been capped off with Gartner's definition / endorsement last year. But to be honest, right, who really cares about the name? It is helpful to have a known label for communication purposes, but what's important is actually the central axiom, which is make it easy to share data. And by now, it's pretty much everyone understands the importance and value of being data-driven, right? Leveraging the value of the data assets we have. The move to software and data centricity has obviously turned industry upside down. Companies that have made this leap, or were born with this, have thrived, and the companies that have not, wither. And as I'm sure we're all aware, it's just as critical in government. And it's been explicitly stated in the form of policy, right, with the federal data strategy. As the mission statement says, we really have to unlock the value of government data and leverage it for our missions. Data fabric is something that really enables this. Sounds great, right? But here's the problem. We kind of all face a reality that looks like this. Countless data silos, some ancient and some newer, and a mess of point-to-point solutions for how data flows, how it is shared in an organization. And by now, it consists of a number of different technologies that frankly were put in place for good reasons with legitimate motivations, probably to solve some of the data sharing issues we're talking about now. In this mess, we typically see a combination of ETL tools or messaging and random services, custom code, et cetera. So obviously, data fabric or any technology or any pattern, it isn't magic, right? It's built on top of components, these technologies. So, you have to ask the question, why won't a data fabric just add more noodles than remove from this spaghetti diagram? No doubt other trends in the past have sought to help and just got added to the pile. And this kind of brings me to some critical properties of a data fabric to make it work. If we start building one and it doesn't support these characteristics, we will have to just, we will just add it to the mess rather than fix anything. First, the data fabric needs to decouple sources and destinations for the data, right? They shouldn't need to know about each other. If they do know about each other, what you've done is created an n-squared organizational and management problem. For the mathematicians, technically it's n times n minus 1 divided by 2. But if you look at this picture on the left, there's only 4 groups here, and it already looks really scary. So you really want to avoid everyone having to talk to everyone else, both people and systems. To decouple, you need something brokering in the middle. So that's sort of the first thing. Next, you need to be able to support consumers of data, both in real time, but also historically, right? In this picture here, you have a data timeline where the oldest data is on the left, moving to the most recent data on the right. It would be nice to share all the data in real time, but many of the systems out there, both providing data and receiving data, don't work in real time, right? They may require some batch processing. And you also need to allow for unreliability in the data consumers. They can go offline or there can be network problems, et cetera. Thirdly, you need to enable projects and groups who want to share data or consume data to do this in an automated fashion, removing as much of the human organizational factors as possible. This is really sort of the frictionless aspect that Gartner was talking about. This means there needs to be well-documented and understood APIs, off-the-shelf connectors to avoid redundant and costly development, and data governance. It turns out that data governance is really important when you're building a data fabric, or really just sharing data in general. There are a lot of components to data governance. I'm obviously not going to talk about it all in a short amount of time, but I'd like to cover sort of the key ones with a data fabric. First off, a data fabric, you have to allow people to actually find the data they care about, right? It's not about one person saying, communicating with a bunch of other people and saying, hey, I just published some data, right? You need to be able to people say, okay, I'm looking for a kind of data. I'm interested in this kind of data. What is there in the data fabric? And they need to be able to read and understand the data. And this is typically done with like a data catalog or a schema registry, and usually a combination. So that you avoid individuals having to sort of try and trace or hunt it down, it needs to provide the provenance of the data being shared. Where did it come from, right? How has it been processed? What's its data lineage? And of course, security and access control is important. It's not just about stopping people from getting data they shouldn't. It's about enabling people who need to provide the data, the comfort. The assurance is probably a better word. That their data is only going to go to the people they care about, so that they'll buy into it. if you don't have critical mass with the data available in the data fabric, there really is not much point. And with that, honestly, I'd like to just conclude by saying, data fabrics are happening at large scale in industry with great success. Both newer companies whose entire businesses depend upon leveraging and sharing data, the likes of LinkedIn, for instance, but also established companies in the FinServ sector, healthcare, automotive, retail, et cetera. In government, right? Let's serve, protect, defend our citizens by leveraging data and supporting the ideals of federal data strategy. I believe the data fabric will be a powerful tool in achieving this. And at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to you, Tom.
No, thank you for that, Will. I think of it, I had a summit about 4 or 5 years ago, the rise of the chief data officer. I think what we saw with COVID, that's massively accelerated. There's no debate anymore and how important our data is. And I think we've learned that through pandemic. So thank you for that.
You bet.
Okay. That was Will LaForest, Public Sector CTO over at Confluent. And now we are going to hear from my good friend, Peter Durand, who's VP of Acquia Federal Sector. I think you got you on mute there, Peter.
Great. Hey, Tom. All right. Glad to be here. Let me grab a slide here just real quick. And
I will say one thing about Peter. He, boy, you guys were ahead of your time. How many times we heard digital transformation? I think you were definitely one of the first companies to actually use that term. And now even from Maria wrote when she opened things up, it's gotten to be a thing. And I think you're at the right place at the right time, especially with pandemic. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you.
No, thank you. I'd appreciate the time. Yeah, so just for those who haven't met me, I'm Pete Durand. I've been with Acquia for 9 years, and just want to spend a few minutes really talking about modernization, but it's really about agility and scale. And we're all trying to, I think the pandemic, certainly with everybody now having to telework and work remotely, and we can't go into offices, is continuing to really drive more and more digital transformation. It's becoming more and more important. So kind of with that, if you haven't heard of Acquia, so what, our whole role is really in empowering government agencies and citizens through really digital experiences. And like, what does that mean? And so we've really been on the forefront of, using open source technology, Drupal, as well as, bear with me, my computer's not paying attention to me. All right, so just real high level, but candidly, Acquia is an open digital experience platform. So today we're actually operating the world's largest Drupal platform as a service. And then part of this is we've completely mapped in a whole digital experience platform to that. Which is really interesting. So we're taking advantage of everything with open source technology, open API approaches, open architecture, and leveraging the cloud. So this is all coming together, really well for so many of the federal agencies and commercial organizations that we work with. I think digital transformation is, it's the next layer of an entire open experience where organizations are really trying to figure out, how do I really help user journeys? How do I help end users and constituents get to the right content, make the right decisions? And how do I do this online with multi-channel and take advantage of commercial marketing capabilities? So, that's where we've been really fortunate to play in that space. And then I'll just kind of walk you through. I'm not going to spend all this afternoon here, but we've got a pretty good branch of organizations. This is certainly not all of them across the U.S. federal government and public sector in general that are really leveraging open source technology, leveraging the cloud, and really trying to figure out how to modernize their digital experiences. Kind of cop security, obviously that's a big thing, and that's a big part of us. So one of the things I thought I would kind of share is, there's been a lot of work over the years for agencies to modernize. What does that mean? What does digital transformation mean? And so I maybe thought I'd use a good example of a project that Acquia is working with our partner called Chorionics Government Solutions. So, today we're just started a project, probably the 10th largest website in the federal government. and it's the Social Security Administration, and it's really interesting as, you know, they're just embarking on their digital journey. So one is, you know, making decisions about, can we use the cloud? How do we move to the cloud? So they're, you know, figuring out, you know, they've made a decision to move to the cloud, and then how do you start bringing in CMS technology, open source technologies? Because at the end of the day, we have an organization as large as they are, they're, you know, their constituents, if you will, us citizens. It's not so easy to go into an SSA office to go get benefits and seek benefits, and how do I interact online? So, you know, with an organization like SSA, that's their whole vision. How do I move services online? Also realizing that some of their constituents may not be as, you know, computer savvy as many of us. So, you know, what I can say is, you know, for an organization like SSA, you know, taking the open source model, it creates an enormous amount of agility, flexibility, and then the ability to add really governance, you know, into these models. So that's really, you know, the most interesting thing we have going on this month, Tom, you know, is working with that and, you know, continuing the fight with leveraging open source, you know, within the federal government here.
Yeah, can I ask you a quick question? I'm wondering how the IDEA Act is affecting government agencies with these mandates. I know we talked before, you have a lot of activity around that. How's that coming along government-wide, would you say?
I'd say it's actually, I think it's really, you know, it's really caught on because, you know, and I've talked before, you know, quite often a lot of these are, you know, websites, applications, things were really designed by engineers. And, you know, what we're seeing, you know, with our customers is that, you know, they're really taking really this user-centric approach and going, okay, how does the user need to interact versus, you know, us engineers deciding, hey, this is how the thing works, you figure it out. So that's, I see that is really starting to have teeth with it. And now that, you know, not only government agencies, not, I'll say not the citizens themselves, but the people that work, you know, in federal agencies, they've got the same demands of their own internal systems. You know, how do I better interact? And yeah, using that whole human-centered or user-centered design. So we see so many organizations going down that path first, really figuring out the UX. And then, you know, based on that, you know, making the determination, okay, what's the right kinds of platforms and tools and things to support that. So yeah, we're actually pretty excited to see that it is starting to take off. It is a challenge for many organizations, but I think it's really starting to take root and hold.
Great. Well, thank you, Peter, for that talk. I really enjoyed it, and we'll see you the next time. Have a good holidays. If we don't
Thanks.
see
you as well. Appreciate it.
Great. That was Peter Durand. Peter is the VP of Federal over at Acquia Federal Solutions. And next up, our last tech talk of the day. So there's no pressure on this next person at all. We have with us Joe Walden, and Joe Walden is the CTO over at Blue Prism Software over all the Americas. And we've been talking a lot about RPA and some of the benefits that it has. And I think this last year, it really went to the mission, and it took yet another step. John, so I'm really interested to see what you have to say.
Well, first of all, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
There you go. Just wanted to make sure. Unfortunately, some of you can see me as well, so I apologize for that ahead of time. For those of you who are not familiar with who Blue Prism is basically an RPA vendor. It's one of the first RPA vendors out there. We've been establishing the market, basically since 2001, came really to the US when I was hired with the organization back in 2015 or so. It's been an amazing run. It's incredible as to how it went from very much an educational orientation to really first idea for almost every organization out there. You know, and some of the reason for that, you can see on the screen here, is the amount of hype that's been put into this idea of age of automation. The idea that, you know, the one critical one is that up to 50% of work that's being done today is being done in such a way because systems haven't been integrated, systems haven't been upgraded. You know, we've had two talks just recently about the data fabric and the idea of CMS. Both of these are great, but if you're still dealing with things that are completely disparate systems, it creates a real problem of being able to resource to be able to do it. Not even to mention when your resources are disparate in disparate locations across the country because we can't travel and everything else. the really key point to all of these numbers and the excitement around this is this idea that as we begin to consider modernization across the board, we have to recognize that that means it's still, despite the educational efforts that have taken place, that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Some folks are just worried about doing task recordings and being able to replay those effectively. Others are really, when they begin to think about a process, are considering a process from an end-to-end perspective. Personally, I don't ever feel that a full process end-to-end can be fully automated, or at least not the exceptions. And so this idea that you often hear about, elimination of jobs, which, generally is not as concerned or prevalent within the bounds of the federal government. But earlier, Andre Mendez talked about using money effectively. And as you begin to look at the processes that have to be done within the federal organization, how they change depending on the administration and everything else, it's really critical to think about how that money is being spent, whether you're going to try and do an end-to-end process or whether you're going to reimagine the process, especially reimagining processes in light of the pandemic, in light of the fact that we can't necessarily have everybody going into a DMV or going into an IRS office or going in wherever office they might need to. That all being said, I want to do a little bit of background as to why there's so many different people who have so many different views as to what modernization and AI looks at. In order to do that, I really want to talk about different industrial revolutions that have occurred. The idea that, industrial revolution of one was, the initial mechanical orientation, and then we had the electricity. And for most people, the Industrial Revolution 3.0 is where we're at to a great extent. We're at this idea that information is being provided, information is available. We've got all sorts of data systems, all sorts of data fabrics that are interconnected or trying to be interconnected. But it's not quite made, most organizations have not quite made the leap yet to being able to utilize and leverage both the cloud technologies that are changing so much, or even more importantly, that final step of really automating things across the board. And that's a critical component, because as you look at automation, you have to understand whether you're talking about, as I said earlier, that desktop automation, whether you're talking about end-to-end automation, or if you're talking about, autonomous type automation. And the critical elements that you have to consider across all of this is that intelligent automation for enterprises is not really made up of any one distinct technology. You already have, as I said before, in the industrial revolution of the 3.0, you've got people and you've got plenty of systems. You've got the systems that may be connected, may not be connected, but it's really understanding that these two make up certain components. The third component is what you should be considering nowadays, based upon the first slide that I showed, is this idea of a digital workforce. And this particular conversation is really supposed to be about IT modernization. And from my perspective, unless you're considering a unified workforce that includes both your people, your processes, your systems, and the digital workforce and how they're integrating with each one of those, you're really missing something. I don't want to talk in nebulous terms all day from that perspective. I'm certainly not trying to do a sales pitch for you. I really am here to inform you. But I decided, because the whole definition of this was the idea of IT modernization, is to take a step back and look at sort of ITIL. And I love the definition of practices in the ITIL definition, because it talks about sets of organizational resources. My definition of resources would be for you to encourage not only your people, your digital workforce, but also your systems. But then the second part of the definition talks about it's the capabilities that really happen within the bounds of the processes and procedures. And the key item that I want you to think about for a few minutes is the fact that automation itself is not ever a limitation of what you have in place, because it's really a matter of leveraging that hierarchical, that historical data systems that you have and using them more efficiently to better accommodate the funding and the location and the resiliency that your organization may have. And because we're talking, ITIL, I decided to focus on three relatively simple things. Things like we've had customers do password resets. We've had customers doing things like onboarding, especially in this separated stage of having some people located all over. The idea of onboarding and offboarding, especially offboarding because it creates such risk, is really a critical component across the board. The idea of being able to provide this is really getting back to this idea that if you can move some of these processes, and I'm not saying all of them, because you will want to have exceptions, those types of things handled by the human, but if you can move some of these to a digital workforce, you're going to end up with some really critical other sides of ITIL that are going to be covered. Things like reporting and measuring. Every digital worker that's out there is going to give you audit capability and governance that you probably didn't have before. And when I talk about assigning work to the right individual, this is something that organizations, both federal and corporate, do very well. You know, you don't give a junior accountant something that they're not going to be able to do. And so we move work around real well. Well, you need to consider, based upon the statistics that I showed you, how much of that work can be moved first and foremost to a digital workforce. Now, I did mention that I've been doing this for a while and I am kind of passionate about it and so forth. I'm going to play a brief video here because one of the questions that I always get asked is, well, it may not work with my system. I've been with Blue Prism going on 6 years now or so, and I have yet to actually find a system that you could not interact with, a process that I could not automate, at least to some extent. What you see on the right-hand side of the screen is actually the diagram, the flow, is actually how you go about creating these automations. And the left-hand sides are the sides that are the system itself. What you see is it actually interacting with all sorts of different systems. You know, you see it interacting with the ServiceNow. It'll show up with SAP. I think in this whole quick little demonstration that I do, the only thing that we don't demonstrate is a mainframe, which I know is out there as well. The key point to this is just to understand that the systems that you have are great. Granted, most of you probably don't have a particular game, but it's even possible on that one. That happened to be included in the video that I had. But the systems that you have are the backbone to being able to provide in this pandemic area, because the processes, the requirements aren't going to change. What's going to change is how you be able to deliver that information. And the idea of being able to have a process that is in place and then being able to deliver it, whether it's via mobile, this is perfect timing from that regard, a mobile app or anything else, is critical to being able to be compliant across an entire element of omni-channel approaches. And this has served us really well. I mean, we've got a number of federal clients. I'm not going to read you all the use cases from that perspective. You know, we are FedRAMP moderate availability from that perspective. The key thing that I really want to spend just a moment or two on is just understanding that as you begin to look at moving your organizations across the spectrum of technology, recognize that a digital worker becomes an enablement for you. You know, so often federal workers, you know, whatever group joint they may want to be, whatever mission they may end up doing, they're dealing with a lot of antiquated systems. Well, as you look to the cloud, as you look to what a lot of folks want to be able to do nowadays, they want to be able to look at the newer technologies. The neat thing about digital workers for your organization is they really do become the focal point for this. I'm a big proponent of recognizing that AI and ML is great, but unless it's done within the bounds of a process, it's a science experiment. And so when we do this, and when we provide digital workers, understand that they're capable of looking at things like sentiment, character recognition, even images, you know, in order to be able to provide safety to somebody, you'd be able to provide resiliencies within your organization. And that key idea of thinking digital first is really critical, not only to improving your processes, but also being able to leverage technologies that a lot of the employees nowadays want to be able to investigate, work with, at the same point in time, getting your money's worth from that perspective. I'm going to end pretty quick here in just a moment here, but I do want to, I've got to give you, this is required, the sort of, you know, why us from that perspective. A digital workforce needs to be considered really across 4 key areas. You know, you want to be able to train it. You want to be able to bring in those intelligence skills that I mentioned. You want to be able to scale it. You want to be able to make sure that, especially in this idea of pandemic, that when you have these needs for resiliencies to be able to roll out VPNs to 100,000 people, that you can have a workforce that's capable of doing that. You know, from a security standpoint, I already mentioned that as well. Everything a digital worker does is far more secure than what a person does. You don't have to worry about what they see on their screen. You don't have to worry about whether or not they're going to do something the way that they're supposed to. And the fact is, it's going to be done much more efficiently than in any other way. And again, the one final point, if you've ended up looking at RPA in the past, if you feel like you've gotten to a point where, I had somebody mention the other day, just being RPA tired, the fact that they've done all sorts of things, they've been trying to figure out how to really move it up on the ramp from that perspective. One of the reasons why it's so important to consider those factors that were listed at the beginning is because this becomes an enabler for you. I've been doing lots of technologies for a lot of different years, and this is probably the RPA and the automation area is really a key component, and it's got such fast, good ability to be able to really deliver that you want to be able to give it some consideration. Any questions on that, Tom? I know you're the only one asking questions. I didn't really look.
Yeah, we're just a little compressed for time. John, I thought that was a great thing. What do you say to folks like, oh, I'm going to lose my job? You know, I think that's one of the biggest false things about RPA that I've ever heard. I mean, you get that, I'm sure, but what's the first response to that?
It's a huge fallacy because digital workers, we're all overworked. You know, the idea of a 40-hour work week went out the window with the invention of the cell phone because we're all electronically leashed, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
The use of resources intelligently is critical. Most companies that say they want to reduce FTEs, they find that they do have less successful orientations. The idea that we have to reduce is really not critical. The idea that move work to where it makes the most sense. Those people need to do those things that are exceptions. They need to do things that have lower confidence when you're using ML and AI. They're still a viable part of your workforce, but you want to unify that with these really junior workers that can do almost, you know, again, I've been here 6 years. I've yet to come across something I can't automate, at least to some extent. So it's not a matter of replacement. It's a matter of what I've often said. I actually think I first said this on Gov Matters TV. It's really about a force multiplication, a force multiplier, rather than a replacement.
Great. Thank you for that, John. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem. I appreciate your time.
Yeah,
today.
and we'll get you back. That was good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next up, we have our last panel of the day, and it is a good one. And we have let me introduce our moderator, Isaac Constance. Isaac, you want to come on? There he is. Isaac is a staff writer over at GovLoop, must follow, must read. And, you know, you've done it for us a couple times, and we keep having you back. So, you know, that first panel was pretty good. You're going to have to really have your A game today. But
I was going to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Haven't screwed up anything too bad just yet, it seems like. So,
well,
yeah,
the day's not over yet. No, I'm just kidding.
Right.
Yeah. Good luck on your panel. We'll see you in a few minutes.
Sounds good. Thank you, Tom. So yeah, start off wishing everybody a happy holidays. I was hoping to get my Christmas tree in the background, but sadly the outlet actually, and then the charging cable didn't reach it. But anyway, thanks for having me, Tom. And, you know, I always enjoy these ATARC events. Like Tom said, the first panel was phenomenal. So I'm looking forward to this one. I know we'll follow in their footsteps the best we can. Starting off, I know, you know, usually I like giving a good spiel to open this up, but we've got a ton to get to in this one. You know what the topic is, IT modernization in government. So I say we just start with the introductions, get right to it, and yeah, hop into the session. So what I'll do is I'll introduce each panelist. I'll go one by one since we've got 8 panelists on this session. And if each panelist just wants to give a quick 3-minute introduction of what they're working on currently and where they stand on the IT modernization front, we can head into the question and answers after that. So starting off, first I'd like to introduce Danielle Metz. Danielle is the Principal Director for the Deputy Chief Information Office for Information Enterprise at the U.S. Department of Defense. So Danielle, how's it going? And yeah, what's going on the IT modernization front over at DoD? Hey, Danielle, you there? Well, brave new world. Oh, sorry.
Hi, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I had to do *6.
No problem.
Hi, Isaac. Hi, everyone. Unfortunately, I'm not able to do Zoom. I'm in the Pentagon today, so we'll have to do it via the phone. So very excited to be a part of this virtual panel. A A quick change has happened, so I'm no longer the principal director, but I am the acting deputy CIO for information enterprise. And we have a lot that is going on in terms of modernization activities, with the catalyst being the National Emergency Declaration. So the biggest thing that my office and team has been responsible for is the creation and implementation of the commercial virtual remote, the IL2 instantiation of Microsoft Teams. We did this in response to the maximum telework back in early March of this year. And it was a partnership with Microsoft and the Military Services, Combatant Commands, DISA, Joint Staff J6, and the DAFAs. And we were able to leverage our the partnership that we had with Microsoft, existing contracts and licenses that we had with Microsoft to create this CVR environment in order for the department's workforce to connect anywhere with anyone on any device. And so originally it was a temporary solution. It was going to go through September. We were able to extend it to June of 2021, and that extension has allowed the department some time in order for us to ensure that we were able to get our secure DoD Microsoft Cloud environment on commercial parity with what we have in CVR today, but in a more secure manner. And so that is the work that we are doing right now. We've accelerated our migration plans by at least 18 months to be able to get where we need to go by June. And so that is a significant undertaking across the department, and it is a thrill to be a part of this activity to see how we are really making the department uncomfortable in terms of moving not only quickly, but being able to deliver discrete capabilities more quickly and more agilely than what we've ever done before, and build upon them in a rapid manner. And so that was the blueprint that we did when we implemented CVR back in the March, April timeframe, and that is exactly what we're doing here. And it really shows how that DevSecOps model works in order to not really go for the perfect, build all your requirements, and then deliver capability to the user, but to get minimal viable product capability out so the user can iterate, and then you get their feedback where you can build upon and enhance and really maximize the full breadth of what it means to have modern software. So that's one aspect of the work that we're doing. And then very quickly in terms of IT modernization for the fourth estate, our office has been leading the effort along with DISA to put a plan in place to optimize 26 networks down to 2, consolidate service desks down to 1, and to optimize over 600 IT contracts into about a handful. As this work has started in FY18, a lot of good work took place in terms of advocacy, collaboration, defining the strategy, and then in FY20, it's been the year of execution. So we're moving out on that. It's called our fourth estate network optimization. So a lot of great work, despite the fact that we're working remote, we're still able to execute mission because of the advancements that we've made, particularly with collaboration and Office Suite productivity through CVR, how we're moving that into a secure Microsoft DoD cloud environment, and then continuing our work with the DAFAs or the fourth estate agencies to be able to optimize and get them on a single provider, single service provider through DISA with 2 modernized networks and associated services on top of that. So I know I just went very quickly. It was a whirlwind explanation of the work that we're doing, but I was really excited to share just those 2 big activities that we have going on. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Isaac.
Thanks so much. Yeah, and definitely look forward to diving a little bit more into those in these next 50 minutes we have coming up. So next, let's go over to Renata Spinks. Renata is the Chief Technology Officer for the U.S. Marine Forces Cyberspace Command, also within the U.S. Department of Defense. Renata, I'm not sure if you have the capability to turn on your camera, but feel free to give a nice introduction as well. Oh for 2 so far. Renata, can you hear me? All right, we'll keep on plugging along, see if we can reconnect with Renata at the end of this lineup. Next up, we'll keep it within DoD and go to Frank Koneshi. Frank is the Chief Technology Officer for the United States Department of the Air Force. Frank, I hope I didn't butcher your name.
That's close, Isaac. Not close enough, but close. Getting better. All right.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hello, everybody. You know, as we got with COVID, you know, what we're trying to do is we're trying to maintain mission for all the airmen out there. And it was kind of interesting because for us, you know, we're located around the world with 160 major installations and like 300 others. So when we said that we have to push everybody out of the bases and everything else, this was a massive undertaking of moving, you know, thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, because we have 750,000 people roughly out of the bases and move them into a telework environment. Now, this caused some issues, obviously. We had to update the network capabilities with the VPNs. We had to update the telephone bridge capabilities. We appreciate DoD, Danielle, with the Teams work because that actually helped us collaborate. And there were people who were trying to do other collaboration methods at the same time using several tools, some, you know, virtual tools that we have, as well as some telephone capabilities that for special operators actually utilize. But the major emphasis we're trying to do is accelerate what we've been doing for digital modernization and transformation. For instance, we're putting LTE and 5G at all the bases. We have a plan to do this right now. We have 10 bases already established with licensing agreements. We'll have 20 more bases established probably in January, and it's going to continue on for that for the rest of the United States and eventually probably get to Europe. So we're trying to get the communications network at the bases completely done for LTE 5G capabilities. On top of that, we're also looking at, you know, what automation capabilities we actually have out there. You know, one of the speakers talked about RPA. Yeah, we've been doing RPA too for a while because we decided we had to get rid of some of the standardized, you know, repetitive activities that people were trying to do and modernize it and make it faster and more agile for everybody. So we've been pushing RPA out there as well as some other capabilities for using AI, ML for various predictive mechanical analysis for the engines and everything else associated with it. And this is where we're also going to have the capability with the network for the 5G is actually using how much data we can actually get out of the IoT sensors that are each of the bases and particularly the depots and actually analyze them and give the maintenance people some predictive analysis of what parts are going to be needed as well as what needs to be done. On top of that, also, we've looked at the user experience. I mean, this is kind of interesting because everybody says the user experience should be great, but of course, when you really get out into the field, you find that for 160 installations, the user experience is different in each installation. Somehow, that's the way it works. There are bases, and in bases, configurations are somewhat different. So we're trying to measure with data the user experience and looking at what can we do to actually make it more effective for the user environment. And on top of that all, you know, we're trying to produce enough devices and use various devices for do not only unclassified processing, but also for classified processing out there. And so we had to generate some more devices, get it out to the field, as well as supporting, you know, the mission because we have to support the mission out there. And not everybody in the workforce can actually, you know, telework at home. Aircraft mechanics cannot actually be there at home. We can use AR, VR for them to support the mechanics that are sitting in the field, but they cannot, you know, everybody cannot be there. So we have rotation schedules established on top of that and the maintenance of that, as well as, you know, we track COVID across all the bases and know exactly, you know, the effects of that and what we plan to do and use that to actually determine the rotation schedules as well as any other effects that we have to maintain to keep the mission going. So in essence, what we're trying to do is make the user, which is our airmen, as effective as possible by using automation tools and techniques and try to ensure that we get the mission accomplished.
Perfect. Thanks, Frank. Going down the list, Justin Marsico is next, Deputy Assistant Commissioner and Chief Data Officer for the Office of Data Transparency within the Bureau of the Fiscal Service and the United States Department of the Treasury. So Justin, I'll turn things over to you.
Thanks, Isaac. Thanks for having me here. So as you heard in my title, one of the things that I help to focus on is data for my organization. So I work for the Fiscal Service, and the Fiscal Service's job is to help to run the financial operations of the US government. So we provide payment services, we collect revenue on behalf of the federal government, we issue auctions to raise money and to help finance government operations. And all of those activities, as you can imagine, involve a lot of data. So we collect a lot of data, and what we're trying to do right now is to figure out how to do that in a better way so that we can be smarter, make better decisions, and be more effective in our mission. So I've been focused on three things generally over the last year. The first is pretty basic, but I think it's really important. It's improving our data governance. What we're trying to do is to bring leaders together across our organization so that instead of making decisions about data in silos, we are eyes open about the impacts that data has across the organization. And when we're making changes related to data or we're making investments in architecture that affect data, we're doing so thinking about the benefits to the entire enterprise instead of to the individual systems that we might be managing in our different offices. So one example of a product that's come out of our data governance efforts has been just establishing principles of what the future of data looks like. So these are things like, instead of just moving to the cloud and copying and pasting our data architecture, really taking advantage of the types of tools and offerings that the cloud has to offer, making sure that when we are modernizing our systems, we are getting rid of manual data movements and replacing them with automated data flows. So anyway, that's the first thing. We're focused on data governance. The second is improving the way that we deliver data to our customers. So again, because we sit at the center of financial operations, we have a lot of data, and the public consumes a lot of that data to understand the federal government and the broader economy. And we're trying to make improvements to all of that data to make it easier for the public to use and consume our data and understand the financial operations of the government. So we recently started an effort to consolidate all of our data onto one site, just to make it easy to know where it all is, and to establish uniform metadata, and to make sure that we have data dictionaries. And for the first time, we actually have APIs now that the public can ping or build off of to get our data the moment that it's released. So that's the second thing. The third thing that we're doing is one of the most exciting things in my mind, which is doing analytics. I often find that producing analytics really gets people excited and allows you to invest in some of the basics of data management and data architecture, because people see the cool things that you're producing and the value that it's bringing to the organization. There's one project that we kicked off recently that is really exciting and is taking advantage of natural language processing through AI. One of the roles that Treasury has is translating appropriations from PDFs into data that goes into systems that authorizes agencies to be able to spend money. That's like one of the first steps in the process that turns something from Congress into money that agencies can spend. And the way that we do that today is we have a team of experts who read through the PDF legislation and who mark it up, and then who enter that into a database. So what we're trying to do right now is to develop an AI that can read through the law and to break it up into data, even though it's not presented in that way, so that the humans can go and review the work and do the corrections rather than having the first, second, third, and final cut at understanding it. And we're hoping through this pilot we can learn some lessons about how AI can improve our operations and keep us focused on use cases that can make us more successful, save resources, or deliver better products and services for our customers. So that's me. Thanks, Isaac.
Absolutely, and look forward to returning that to those topics pretty soon. Next up, we'll go to Benjamin Barry. Benjamin is the Executive Vice President and Chief Information Officer for the Department of Energy's Bonneville Power Administration. Benjamin, what do you all have going on the IT modernization front?
Well, thanks a lot, Isaac, for having me here at ETARC. BPA is very large in terms of the systems that we're supporting. We have about 200 different projects and services that we are providing our customers. We have two major lines of businesses, transmission, electric transmission, and then power marketing, the sale of electricity. But if you look at Bonneville, we have about 31 hydroelectric dams providing electricity and one nuclear power station. All of that is sold to 142 utility companies, electric utility companies. So we don't sell to consumers, we sell to these electric utility companies in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana. To that end, our #1 project is grid modernization. So in that particular project, started in late 18, it will finish up in FY22. We're really looking at how to make the system more reliable, more efficient, more effective, and also at the same time, cost conscious around cost management, while moving into new markets such as the energy imbalance market in California. So that has a huge sucking sound of a lot of resources going toward that effort, both in material and capital and people and time. But the pandemic itself actually hit us, as you know, in March of 2020. And so when we were able to meet with people in meetings and have face time with folks, we had to change all of that. And I remember coming back from a vacation in New Orleans 2 weeks after Mardi Gras, and I think I got the last plane out of New Orleans. That Sunday around 5 o'clock, we had an emergency policy group meeting around, we had discovered 2 IT people who potentially had symptoms of COVID. And so the question became, should we just isolate that particular section of the floor, or should we isolate the whole floor itself? You know, in headquarters, should we actually look at isolating different buildings in the different states? Because corporate people in headquarters, they're very mobile. They go to these different locations all across these 4 states. And so the decision was really based on, well, can we start teleworking the very next day? And so they turned to me as CIO and said, okay, Ben, can you handle this? And I knew we had done the inclement weather teleworking services where we could have at least 2,000 people simultaneously connected to our network. Well, in this case, we're talking about 4,000 people. And we had designed our VPN and our MyCP application for people's home computers to be agile and to be able to be expanded very quickly. And so the very next day, we turned that over. The entire company was able to telework within our architected network. And then we only brought in our mission essential function staff into our control centers, about 123 people. The rest were actually out working in their homes. Now we've dialed that back in somewhat. So we have about 10% of our 4,000 workforce back into our buildings. In some respects, we are up to about 20% when you look at the people who are working in the field, because they really can't work out of their houses. They work in the field. And so that's where we are today in terms of grid modernization. Some 35 applications that are basically grid modernization applications. Those are the ones we will fulfill and turn on by FY22.
Great. Well, I was also in New Orleans for Mardi Gras, Benjamin, and I'm there currently. That's my hometown. So yeah, I'm happy you got out on the last flight. Going forward, let's see who we've got next. We can go over to Jonathan Phoebus. He's the Chief Information Security Officer and the Deputy Director for the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Jonathan, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you. Hi. So as the Chief Information Security Officer, I want to make sure that all of our data is safe, that all of our systems are safe, that all of our users are safe, and that all of their computers are safe. So when we looked forward to modernizing a few years back, the first thing we thought was mobility is going to be the key to our success. So we started out by looking for laptops, for mobile phones, for other mobile platforms that we could get people up and running on. And lo and behold, when COVID came to visit this spring, we were ready to send people home. We had architected a number of ways for folks to get into our systems, our applications, and to work on our data. And it was a relatively easy thing for us to do, to say, stay home, work from home. We did have to boost up some bandwidth. We did have to make some changes in routing to get everyone in on VPN. We had to make some changes to some other applications to keep people up and running. But by and large, we were able to get everybody functional pretty darn quick. With everybody home, the first thing that people started clamoring for was more collaboration applications. Fortunately, we had a number that we were working with, and we just turned on features and let folks come and tell us how they wanted to use it. And by and large, our user community was very quick to tell us what they were happy with, what they were not happy with, and what they wanted to see next. It was also able to, because of the continuous diagnostics and mitigation program from the Department of Homeland Security, we had a fantastic number of tools in place. So we were able to monitor usage, we were able to monitor configurations, we were able to monitor patches, and we're quickly able to get folks collaborating the way they wanted to, keep their machines up to date, distribute new applications or new capabilities as was needed. And things moved fairly well until folks said, you know, I'm no longer sitting in a conference room looking at these folks. I need some dashboards. So we were able to very quickly, using, again, applications we already had in our environment, to start building low-code, no-code apps to quickly start displaying data. And it was fantastic. Folks were able to tell us what they wanted to see. We were able to quickly prototype it. We were able to make sure that the folks who needed to see the data were also the folks who were authorized to see the data. So we didn't leak any data out while we were doing this. And once we had those applications up and running, we had a number of folks who said to us, you know, I really want to share this with our licensees so that they can see that even though we're not there on their site as much as we used to, even though they're not coming to visit us in our office, we're still getting things done. So we were able to open that up to our licensees. And because of the Evidence Act, we knew the data that was really important to us. We knew the data that was really important to the rest of the federal government. And we knew the data that was really important to our licensees as well. So we were able to come up with major chunks of it to ensure that, again, the folks who were authorized to see it could see it. The folks who needed to make changes to it could make changes to it. And we were able to work in near real time with our users and with our licensee, with those two communities, to come up with better ways of storing our data, routing our data, and managing the data online, and to keep it feeding to our applications. So we took this as a fantastic opportunity to teach ourselves how to redo business with everyone scattered. We ended up with a lot more endpoints, but we had data to tell us what was happening with those endpoints. We ended up with a lot more applications, but we were able to route those applications through our VPNs over our cloud services and to our end users in a variety of modes. So overall, we came out of this with a much more understanding workforce. They now understood what the IT folks were providing for them. They also understood the major tenets of cybersecurity, and that we were trying to help keep their data safe and their workflows safe. So we ended up with a much more engaged user community that is looking for new ways to innovate their workflows, with new ways of developing applications on the fly, and with new ways of engaging their licensees and public constituents. So this was sad to say, but a great opportunity for us to improve our services and keep them secure at the same time.
Absolutely. I've heard that a few times over. Keeping the train rolling. Mike, we can go to you next. Mike Galbraith is the Chief Digital Innovation Officer within the Office of the Chief Information Officer in the Undersecretary of the Navy within, of course, the U.S. Department of the Navy. So, Mike, I'll turn it to you.
Wow, I never heard that title that way. But thanks, Isaac. I appreciate you
Trying
coming.
to spin it up, yeah.
I work in the Department of the Navy, responsible to partner with the Marine Corps and the U.S. Navy and the Secretariat. So, before the pandemic, we had just published the Department of the Navy's Information Superiority Vision, and that was our adaptation of the National Defense Strategy, Mr. Deasy's cloud policy and digital modernization policy, and used those as the guide rails in how we applied that to the Navy, and we looked at those issues. And our role in the Don CIO is to transform our IT capabilities, to define and implement a portfolio of modern enterprise cloud-based services. The Navy had pretty much been compartmentalized, a lot of silos. One of those initiatives was the implementation and definition strategy of a digital workplace. And, when COVID hit, that accelerated those plans. And very similar to Frank, and focus on the mission of the airmen, our focus was on the mission of 700,000 sailors, Marines, and civilians. And we quickly, learned that we were not prepared. Our infrastructure was creaky, and like everybody else on the phone, we had to increase bandwidth. We doubled the amount of bandwidth and circuits that we had in the Navy. We increased our, VPN and remote access capabilities, tenfold. We added all types of laptops and cell phones and tablets on the classified side and the unclassified side. So, getting the infrastructure there quickly was our key goal. I'm 35 years in industry. I've only been in DOD in the Department of the Navy for about 1.5 years now. And so, I found that the clock speed of the government is a lot different than industry and manufacturing, chemical, and automotive environments that I come from. But what I found was that DOD can operate at a different clock speed. Danielle was part of the CVR team and the cloud office working with Microsoft. We brought up 1.5 million CVR Teams users across the DoD. The agencies worked well together in about 6 weeks. And that is at industry pace. What we're working on now is how do we sustain that clock speed? And we are doing that in the cloud-based O365 environment. We're perpetuating that digital workplace and that ability to move and contact data, people, applications anywhere. And again, thank you, Danielle, for your help and leadership there. I thank Frank and the Air Force and Lauren Knausenberger. They've been great partners and have led the way in that cloud-based environment, and we're continuing to do that. But some of the things that I learned personally and noticed had nothing to do with technology. It didn't have anything to do with the infrastructure or the systems. I learned that, we talked about time, but I also learned that, a crisis magnifies an organization's disorganization. It was a phrase I coined. And we quickly got over that, but the ability to communicate and who owned communications, who owned the decision rights, And in our environments and the authorities of Title 10 and Title 40 and Title 50 and Title 35 and all of the various instructions, there was a lot of issues early on with regards to, you know, who could make things happen. Again, quickly, we got over those. And those decision rights and those accountabilities and those clear lanes to accomplish things, that was, you know, I would say was a bright spot. If there is a bright spot in COVID, that was one, because it forced us as a Department of the Navy to kind of look at that and reevaluate how we team and partner across not just the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Secretariat, but even within the services themselves, there was some issues. So that has been a great, great learning experience. And the acceleration, again, of that digital workplace, the acceleration of our network constructs. We are in a process of modernizing our networks to flatten those and to extend those from our enterprise business networks to the tactical edge. And you know, that flagpole to foxhole interoperability is key to moving data seamlessly across the organization, and the intersections of technologies of that data. And that, you know, Frank talked a little bit about 5G, but you know, 5G opens up a lot of ability at the edge, and for us to push AI and ML out to that edge to aid and assist the sailors and the Marines for decision making, to process sensor data, you know, and just those intersections and that convergence of various technologies are now starting to open up. And those are things that, you know, we're looking very forward to as we, you know, continue to push the envelope on that technology.
Definitely. Well, thanks, Mike. And we have two more panelists we still need to get to. I've heard that we do have Renata. So we'll get to her first. First, Chris, I want to bring you into this conversation. So Chris Borneman is the Vice President and Chief Technology Officer for Software AG Government Solutions. Chris, how are you supporting efforts like the ones that we've heard previously?
Absolutely, right? So one of the advantages in my role is working closely with our customers and kind of seeing like what challenges are they doing and what are they trying to go through and solve. And looking at both the intersection of IT modernization and then, you know, a lot of topic today around COVID, there's really been two big themes that we've seen and that we've been helping out our customers with. And the first is we've talked a lot about, you know, how it affects our employees, right? But also how does it affect our constituents? And so an example I will give you with my own home state here in Virginia is the Department of Motor Vehicles, right? So not only have we, you know, shut down our retail, but we shut down our DMV and all the in-person. And even today, for Virginia, that's while it opened up, you know, in like, you know, early October, it's extremely limited, right? You know, appointment in advance, you know, the schedule goes out months to try and get a little bit of a window. So there's this big shift in going to self-service, you know, things that we used to be able to do in person. Our governments also need to be able to adjust, just like retail has, and be able to do all this online as much as self-service and you know, as little friction as possible. And for Virginia, what's interesting is that a lot of those transactions are already modernized and they're already online, but they did it in a way where we connect back into their mainframe and expose it out into modern APIs that they do off of their UIs. I can do it off my mobile phone, I can do it off of a web browser, etc. But every time I'm interacting, either I'm you know, changing my location of the vehicle or registering new tags, etc. All of it is just hitting the back end side off of the mainframe. And that's worked out really well for them for modernization, rather than throwing out everything they had already done and coded over years and then re-architecting and redeveloping. they were able to just extend what they already had and put that nice interface and get rid of the kicks and the green screens, et cetera, to go through and do it. And we've seen a lot of interest in that currently. And right now we're working with another agency at the federal level that, literally, every citizen of the US is a customer for them. So very, very high scale that are doing the same thing where they've got programs written in COBOL, et cetera, that go back 30, 40 years that they need to go through and modernize. And they tried a lot of different, modernization techniques of replacing and refactoring and converting into procedural code, into Java code, et cetera. And just a lot of cost challenges and risks that they're now looking to actually go through and expose out into those secure APIs. So the integration for modernization, what I have and how do I bring forward is one big trend and acceleration on that. And the other is the cross-agency communication. And so, if we look at how do we enable organizations, if I look at CARES Act and you have the IRS and issuing out checks, but how do I tie that back into state data to know who's incarcerated, who's not eligible, who's got child welfare checks that they need to be needs to be coordinated off of the CARES funds to actually pull against that for those refunds rather than going straight on out. And so you have this need for cross-agency, cross-government communications. An example, for us that work with the state of Pennsylvania is how they've merged their data between the corrections side with the other state benefit side, and they've been able to go through and avoid $200 million in fraud of ineligibility just within their own state in that small program. And you start opening it up to the federal level, you can see a lot of value, and that COVID kind of shines that light for that need, for that modernization into one, exposure, embrace what you have, and then two, that cross organization communications.
Definitely, I think that's a valuable perspective. So thank you for sharing that. And final panelist, in the introduction phase of this, of course, question and answer, we'll have to abridge it a little bit. But Renata Spinks, I'm going to bring out the acronyms for this one. Renata is the CTO for the U.S. Marine Forces Cyberspace Command within the DoD. So Renata, on to you.
Hey, thank you so much, Isaac. I'm sorry about that technical difficulty. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me.
All set here.
Okay, great. Wonderful. So Marine Corps Cyber is unique. We have two missions. We got the business of IT, and then we have Marine Corps warfighting, all with security and risk acceptance in mind. So a few projects we had underway before COVID was joint regional security stacks and upgrading our infrastructure. We always knew Marine Corps had to get to the cloud. We needed that, that fast compute and store, as well as our commandant wanted to start enabling artificial intelligence and machine learning. So those were two areas we knew we had to make sure our security was in place, and that transport layer needed some upgrades. So looking at our circuit switches, routers, working with DISA on cloud access points and tactical entry points. The last piece we did was talk about identity and access management as we looked at our Office 365 pilot, which after COVID-19, working with the Department of Defense CIO team, I heard Ms. Metz on earlier, so this will be familiar to her, and Mr. Galbraith as well, as we look through Office 365 and enabling all of its capabilities that we could bring to bear. But we really looked at identity and access management and opportunities for machine learning to implement some zero trust principles at not only the transport layer, as we look at, opportunities of choice is what I like to call it from a flow 3 perspective, but also at the application layer and that break and inspect from a data access layer, just understanding what's happening with your data, who's accessing it, and who's supposed to be accessing the data, and how is that data supposed to behave. Last two are projects being very time sensitive and trying to just kind of let everyone on the panel participate in the panel know what Marine Corps is thinking. You heard about cloud-based, the CBII portal. So we're entry level on that, just trying to enable our recruiters and our Marine and the civilian workforce with, again, some options to be able to do things very differently, whether that's accessing, training for LinkedIn Learning, We have Marines aboard ship. How can we get them to continue business, what we call business operations aboard ship, and access things like, ways that they can communicate back with family, whether that's, Twitter handles or Facebook or things like that, and how can you do that in a secure manner? Last but not least, war fighting, enabling that digital space for war fighting and naval tactical grids. So defining those cyber tools that are needed so that we can keep our war fighters safe as well, and enabling mission commanders to make decisions. So you'll hear a lot of us talk now about big data analytics, unified platform, and just making sure that even when we're on mission, supporting that defense strategy from a DCO and OCO perspective, that we are enabling decision-making with security in mind. And with that, I'll yield it back to you.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Renata. And we'll keep it with you for starting off this next round of questions. I've got the thumbs up for 15 more minutes if everybody can go ahead for that. So we'll run through these really quick. I'm going to ask everybody as closely as you can, just stick to around a minute for this first answer, just so we can make sure to fit in one more question after this as well. But starting off, I want to hear from everybody really, what solutions have you found or really employed during the pandemic, and how have those furthered your IT modernization efforts for the long term? So Renata, I'll turn it back to you there. Hey, Renata, are you still on?
Hey, can you hear me? I see your mouth moving, but I can't hear. Can you repeat that?
Yes, yeah. It's what solutions have you discovered or otherwise employed during this pandemic, and how do you see those impacting IT modernization in the long run?
So I think Office 365 is a hot topic as a solution, as something that, or an application that's great. But when I think of solutions, I think about capabilities. So our ability to censor our network, I think, has been the game changer for us. We've experienced a few, challenges when it comes to supply chain, and everyone's experiencing that as the pandemic is upon us, and getting equipment in. But one thing that I am grateful that we've been able to do is, use solution architecture to censor our network, using the MIT Lincoln Lab studies and the MITRE ATT&CK frameworks. We know those are solutions and frameworks that work for us. And so now we're creating architecture that pulls that information for us so that we can understand what's going on in our network. And as we continue to, continue our role in cybersecurity, we also look at ways to help strategic decision-making at the CIO level, whether that's the DOM CIO, whether that's Mr. Deasy and his team, or DCI and some of the resource challenges that we're all experiencing throughout the Department of Defense. So from a solution, multiple frameworks, we're definitely looking at zero trust principles. Everyone knows I like to talk about that a lot because that is, I think, the bread and butter and the nucleus of everything within your network when you're trying to provide capabilities to a distributed network, whether it's in a degraded environment or fully connected. There's just some things you have to be aware of, and those zero trust principles and algorithms and machine learning, it gives us humans a little bit better security, peace of mind wise, when I can use a machine to do things a whole lot faster than my puny little brain can carry.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. Chris, I'll go to you, same question.
Thanks. I mean, and definitely within our own organization, we've been on Office 365 for quite some time, but all of our mobile tools, including Zoom, like we're on today, has really kind of changed our workflow in some ways for the better, right? We definitely see our customers a lot more because there's no travel involved, but we see our families less, even though we're in the same household, we're all tend to be working a lot more. But from a customer perspective, what's really kind of had an interesting effect is more of a move towards cloud and FedRAMP. Your customers are looking to really go through and get to those new capabilities as fast as possible. And for us, one of those areas really has been around enterprise architecture is starting to bubble back up from a key agency capability. As they look at modernization, as they start reevaluating their office space and what they want to move to cloud, just knowing what they've got and what's the best candidates, there's been a big shift for that too.
Great. Mike, going on to you.
You know, probably the biggest, broadest components that we had, you know, I'm going to foot stomp on what Renata said in the Department of the Navy, has been the CVR burn down, I'll call it. So CVR has been a great bridge for us. And again, a good catalyst for us to get to that M365 environment. And, you know, the email and collaboration and Teams capability is one thing, but it is all the other doors that environment has opened for us in the Department of the Navy and DoD as a whole, I'd say. You know, it gives us a different networking construct to get at cloud services. And that forced us to look at the topology of our network. It forced us to look at our endpoint security differently, the amount of traffic that went over the networks, the impact and capacity on our clients and our client images, the way that we secure and defend our network. We had to really take some introspective looks there. How we operate our networks and our systems. We had outsourced an awful lot in the Department of the Navy to a point where it was probably to our detriment. And, you know, so it was, again, one of those things that we learned during the pandemic, and that we need a government-owned, government-operated, and contractor-supported environment. And the Marine Corps had that, but the Department of the Navy and the Navy as a whole didn't have that across the board. So again, I will just say that it's M365 and that cloud enablement that opened up our networks, our security, plus the collaboration that it brings, plus the data assets and data management and tagging that will bring, how we do records management, e-discovery, websites, portals, all those things open up a little bit without untangling that big hairball of legacy systems that we have today.
Right. Perfect. Thanks, Mike. Jonathan, going on to you. I'm also interested to hear your thoughts on whether you do think Zero Trust is the future, being the CISO you are.
So we tried role-based access control. It had some pluses, it had some minuses. We're now looking at attribute-based access control. There are a lot more pluses there, but building the baseline infrastructure to make sure you've got the right attributes, that you understand who is accessing your data, that you understand the constraints of that data, is a big thing. And I think it's going to be a pathway to the future, because as we've learned going out for COVID, where my hardware is not really that important to me. If it's in the cloud, if it's in a FedRAMP cloud, that's fantastic. I can defend it, I can access it. Do I necessarily need my VPN? Does a web portal work? I've got multiple avenues to get to it. But figuring out who it is and what it is are going to be the game changers at the end. So yes, Zero Trust is going to be something we're really going to need to focus on over the next few years. And I think our users are getting used to that too, because they used to want to have a piece of iron under their desk because flashing lights or the warmth of the power supply made them feel like they were doing something when they were running their simulations. Now they're much happier having it in the cloud, that it turns on when they need it, that it turns off when they don't. And I'm much happier because it's easier to patch in the cloud and it's easier to inventory. So I think the cloud has been a fantastic change here. It's helping us modernize. Now we've got to change up on how we look at the processes instead of the applications. We need to be focused on the data, who has access, what can they do with it, and what shouldn't they be able to do with it.
Perfect. Benjamin, going over to you, what solutions and have you all discovered, and are those there for the long term?
Well, Isaac, I always say never waste a crisis. So we had all kinds of new opportunities. One of the things we had started to move away from our older equipment, which was 6 and 7 years old. So we were about 80% into the refresh. And now we lease all that equipment on a 3-year refresh cycle. The other thing was the telework. We discovered people can actually do the work without physically being in the seat in the office. So that told us that we could start to look at widening our understanding of telework to more of a remote worker scenario. So now we have identified what positions can actually be a remote worker, someone who doesn't necessarily work in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, the Pacific Northwest, but may work on the East Coast. They work down south somewhere and still work for Bonneville. So that's going to bring more talent into Bonneville Power Administration. But on the other side, it's going to allow us to retain staff who want to leave Oregon and move to the East Coast. So it's a two-sided approach for this remote worker designation. So I think the way we're looking at the pandemic in terms of the things that are making sense that we may not have thought of before are really making us more efficient and more effective going forward.
Absolutely. Justin, going on to you, same question about Treasury.
You know, I just wanted to echo something that that Ben just said. I've had a number of people start on my team since the pandemic, and they haven't been able to move to DC, and they ordinarily would have moved to DC to start. So they've just stayed wherever they happen to be. So instead of having everyone in DC, like I normally would, I've got somebody in Mississippi, somebody in Oregon, someone in Michigan, outside of Detroit, another person in Los Angeles. And like, it's really working. It's working just fine. And I think a lot of us are kind of like, you know, surprised by this, but also trying to think of like, what does this mean for the future of our workforce? And like, once this is over, what is it that we go back to? Like, what does the future actually look like? And, you know, part of what we're thinking about now is that if the rest of the world changes and allows some of the flexibility that Benjamin was talking about, and we don't change, then we're putting ourselves at a competitive disadvantage for hiring top flight talent. So anyway, thank you for mentioning that. You know, one other thing that we've learned from the pandemic is really about talking to employees. And so there's this question that everybody's had of like, do I need to be in the office? Am I not being in the office? And what we decided to do at the Fiscal Service was to take a data-driven approach and to be totally transparent with our staff about how we were going to make decisions. So we made a dashboard showing all of our different regions and the different cases, COVID cases in those regions. We pulled, created APIs and pulled the data from Johns Hopkins and the COVID tracking project. And then we posted the dashboard and said, okay, all staff, this is how we're gonna make decisions. When things look bad in your area, then you know that we're in phase 0. When things start to get better, you know, according to these metrics, we're moving to phase 1. And it was really helpful for the executives because we all knew how we were gonna make decisions, but then the employees just reported to us like feeling a sense of trust and faith in leadership, right, because like we were being so open and transparent with them about this decision that was tough, you know, or that they were worried about.
Definitely. And Frank, I remember you talking about something similar to that as well that you all have undertaken. What other solutions and, you know, same question, what's here to stay for Air Force?
I think, you know, we've all agreed that eventually we've been a mobile environment anyways. So most of us have teams that exist across multiple bases. And so we are, all of a sudden, we are mobile anyways in how we relate to people. So our teams are distributed. So when they go home and work from home, for us, it doesn't matter because we never see them anyways in person. I always see them as through collaboration sites and telecoms. But I think, you know, as we agree that eventually we're going to be doing more of this, we need to secure that environment for that person, for the user. And so the zero trust thing is going to be big for us as we're going forward. I mean, we've done some software defined networking already, but this is a push for zero trust. And on top of that, we are going to enhance our ICAM solution. We are going by attribute-based Jonathan, just let you know, we've had demos, pilots already on it, and we know the problems of it, but we're actually going to proceed down that path now because we want to be rock solid as to what we want to do with authentication and authorization capabilities. So I think that's what we learned, is that we expect our workforce to be distributed. We got to secure it, and they'll continue on for, you know, whatever we need to do.
Right. Yeah, this really is something that's going to stay around. So Danielle, we'll go over to you, and you have the job of closing us out as well.
All right, thanks everyone. This has been a really good dialogue and discussion, and I think if I could, the biggest takeaway that I believe the department learned from the pandemic is the fact of how resilient our workforce is, and the need for us to be able to come together fairly quickly without hidden agendas, and to be able to chart out a path for us to be able to ensure that our workforce is able to work safely, execute mission, and support whole government. And with those three guiding principles, we were able to do that with the delivery of CVR. I think the pandemic also showed that we need to think differently in terms of where our workforce is executing mission. We've built our networks, our applications, everything as if the people are to be inside a building, inside the Pentagon, inside a headquarters. And that is not modern thinking, and that is not a reflection of the reality. And I really think that because of the maximum telework that has started in March, will probably continue for a while, has really cracked that paradigm and forced technologists to really think about how we should deliver technology, and to not view technology necessarily as back office, but as the way to execute mission to support the warfighter. And I think all of those threads really crystallized over the past few months, and the catalyst was the fact that you know, the department needed to change its mindset on how we do work and where we do work. And I think it's amazing to see that we were able to adapt so rapidly and to actively be able to deploy collaboration capabilities where there was still continuity of work. It was seamless to the workforce. And now we're working to have those types of capabilities within our secure environment. And then the fact that we are no longer building very onerous programs with everything kind of built in perfectly before delivering to the user, but really pushing the envelope to be able to deliver discrete, small amounts of capability to the user so that we can quickly build upon that. All that activity took place this past spring, and you saw and you've heard through my fellow panelists how each of those different piece parts were able to work together to be able to do some fairly revolutionary activity in such a dire environment, and yet still be able to maintain and continue executing missions. So I think that's a really remarkable story. So I'm happy to be a part of that. And with that, Isaac, I turn it back to you.
Fantastic. I think that's a perfect conclusion. So thank you so much. And thanks to all our panelists. I love how uniformly everybody is on board with this new way forward. It's amazing what a push this has been. So we're just scratching the surface here, but look forward to having more of these conversations in the future. So thank you all so much for being on. And Tom, I'll return it to you.
Thank you, Isaac. And Mike, big Steeler fan over here. I like your shrine.
Oh, sorry. I didn't know how to blur my background, so.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. Good stuff. Thank you all. That was one of the best panels we've done, period, I think. Great, Isaac. I appreciate all the juggling we did to get that working. That worked out well. Okay, want to thank everybody who joined us today, especially the diehards. It went a little long, but I think it was worth it, as you probably found out. Want to thank all of our panelists, our fabulous keynote, Maria wrote. I also like to thank our partners again. Couldn't do this without them. Software AG, Government Solutions, DocuSign, Pluralsight, Confluent, Acquia Federal Sector and Blue Prism Software. We hope to see you next Tuesday for our establishing data governance throughout the federal government data space. Should be a great discussion, one of the last things we're doing all year. And we hope to see you there and have a great day. Thank you.